The rain has been falling for a days, heavy enough to turn the ground into dark paste and swell the river beyond its usual banks. Trees lean under the weight of water. Grasslands disappear beneath shallow sheets of mud, somewhere near the edge of a broad African floodplain, long before villages, fields, or written memory. A group of early humans faces a problem that is both simple and profound. The land around them is alive with food, water, timber, and danger, but it offers no guarantee of safety. The open ground is wet, the river may rise again, predators move along the margins, night will come, and with it cold, insects, and the possibility that every dry surface will vanish. One of them drags a heavy trunk across the saturated earth. Another has already cut into a second piece of wood, shaping a deep notch with stone tools. The wood resists, and chips break away under repeated blows. Yet the trunks are not left where they fall. They are fitted together, one crossing the other, the notch holding them in place. The result is not a random pile of branches and not a tree naturally trapped by floodwater. It is an arrangement made by intention, a deliberate alteration of the landscape. Nearly 500,000 years later, that ancient construction survives at Kalambo Falls in Zambia because waterlogged sediments protect the wood from decay. Its age, at least about 476,000 years, places it long before cities, agriculture, and Homo sapiens in their modern form. What the structure was used for remains uncertain. It may have supported a raised platform, a walkway, a working surface, or the foundation of something larger. No roof remains. No walls survive. No human fossil lies beside it to identify the builder. Calling it the first house would go beyond the evidence, yet it reveals something no less important. People of the Middle Pleistocene were already capable of looking at a difficult place and deciding that the place itself could be changed. That decision marks a quiet turning point. Early humans have always used natural refuges. A cave offers protection because geology made it. A tree canopy blocks rain because branches grew there. A hollow provides cover because wind and water carved it. Eventually, however, people begin to do something different. They select materials, move them, reshape them, and organize space around their own needs. The difference between occupying a place and constructing one may begin with only a few pieces of wood, a ring of stones, a cleared surface, or a fire positioned where smoke can escape. Archaeology rarely preserves the first attempt. It preserves only the rare moments when mud, minerals, or accident protect the traces from time. This is why the search for the first human home is not a search for one neat beginning. There is no single doorway through which humanity steps from wilderness into architecture. Instead, there are scattered clues separated by enormous distances and tens of thousands of years. At Kalambo Falls, the clue is joined timber, at Terra Amata on the Mediterranean coast, around 400,000 years ago. It is a pattern of post holes, stones, hearths, tools, and debris that some researchers interpret as the remains of temporary shelters. At Boxgrove in southern Britain, it is a carefully organised activity area where a horse was processed with remarkable efficiency. At other sites, it is charcoal, broken bone, worked wood, or the repeated return to the same favourable patch of land. What survives in the record suggests that a home, in this deep past, is not necessarily a permanent building. It is a temporary island of order. It may last for a season, or only long enough to process an animal, repair tools, rest, and move on. Its boundaries may be invisible. One side is marked by a hearth, another by discarded flakes of stone, another by the place where meat is cut or wood is shaped. The arrangement matters because survival depends on more than finding food. It depends on reducing risk, preserving warmth, managing tools, avoiding smoke, and keeping useful materials close. The people often associated with this world are called Homo heidelbergensis, but even the name is less secure than it once appeared. It was created from fossils, not from campsites, and those fossils may not all belong to a single, unified species. Some populations in Europe appear close to the ancestry of Neanderthals. Some African fossils may relate more closely to the lineage that eventually produces Homo sapiens. Others remain difficult to place. Scholars still debate whether Homo heidelbergensis should describe one widespread species, several regional populations, or only a narrower group of fossils. The label is useful, but it can create a false impression of certainty, as though every hand axe, hearth, wooden tool, and possible shelter from this period belong to the same people. The builders at Kalambo Falls cannot be named with confidence. The possible shelter makers at Terra Amata cannot be assigned securely either. Their bones are absent or ambiguous, while their actions remain. This creates one of the central mysteries of early human history. Archaeologists can sometimes see what was done more clearly than who did it. A cut mark reveals a gesture, a fitted log reveals planning, a hearth reveals repeated attention. A concentration of tools reveals that tasks were arranged in space. Identity, however, is harder to recover. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. The story ahead is not only about a disputed species name or a handful of famous sites, it is about the transformation of survival itself. When early humans begin to carry more than tools across the landscape, they carry expectations. They recognize what a useful place should contain fresh water nearby, wood for fuel and construction, stone suitable for cutting, access to animals and plants, ground that drains, routes that remain passable, and some protection from weather. In that sense, the earliest home may not begin with walls, it begins with judgment. A river terrace is safer than a flood channel. A lakeshore rich in fuel may be worth returning to. A windy ridge may be avoided despite its view. A cluster of trees can slow the cold. A fire can turn darkness into a guarded circle. Timber can lift bodies and materials above wet ground. Stones can hold posts, mark edges, or stabilize a surface. Each choice reduces uncertainty by a small amount. The world outside remains immense and uncontrollable. Ice advances and retreats. Forests spread, thin, and return. Animal herds change their routes. Rivers abandon old channels. Populations appear in regions, disappear, and later arrive again. Western Europe may be occupied in pulses rather than by one continuous people. A camp that seems permanent when viewed in a museum may have been only a brief pause between migrations. Yet these pauses matter. They show that early humans are not simply enduring environments, they are learning to organize them. The first structures are therefore not crude versions of modern houses. They belong to a different way of living, mobile but not aimless, temporary but not careless. Their makers understand weight, balance, fracture, fire, and season. They know that a piece of wood can become more than a branch and that a chosen place can become more than open ground. Long before architecture becomes monumental, it becomes practical. Long before people build for gods, rulers, or the dead, they build against rain, cold, mud, darkness, and the unpredictability of the next day. And somewhere in that long, uncertain age, beneath skies that change faster than species names can follow, the idea of shelter begins to shift. A safe place is no longer only discovered, it can be made. The species name enters history not through a house, a hearth, or a wooden structure, but through a jaw pulled from gravel near the German town of Mauer. In October 1907, workers in a sand quarry uncover a human lower jaw unlike any living one. It is massive, thick-boned, and almost complete, with teeth that appear surprisingly human, set inside a frame that seems built on a heavier scale. There is no skull attached to it, no skeleton, no tools resting in direct association, and no clear picture of the individual to whom it belonged. Yet this single piece of anatomy will become the foundation of one of the most influential and most disputed names in human evolution. The quarry lies southeast of Heidelberg, where layers of ancient river sediment have accumulated over immense spans of time. The jaw comes from deep deposits associated with a world of extinct animals and shifting waterways. Its discovery is carefully reported to Otto Schoetensack, a German anatomist and prehistorian who has long believed that the region may preserve traces of very ancient humans. In 1908, after studying the specimen, he gives it a new scientific name, Homo heidelbergensis, the human from Heidelberg. Naming a species from one jaw is an act of confidence, but also an act shaped by the science of its era. At the beginning of the 20th century, the human fossil record is still sparse. Neanderthals are known but remain poorly understood. Java has produced remains that will later be classified as Homo erectus. The evolutionary relationship between these fossils, living humans, and apes is under intense debate. Every new bone appears capable of redrawing the family tree. Schoetensack sees the Mauer jaw as ancient and distinctive, perhaps representing a form between earlier humans and later Neanderthals. The jaw certainly looks powerful. Its body is unusually thick and it lacks a modern human chin. The ascending portions at the rear rise strongly toward the joints. Yet the teeth are not enormous or primitive in the way some might expect. They show a mixture of features. One reason the fossil seems to occupy an intermediate position. The individual was probably an adult, though the jaw alone cannot reveal sex with confidence. Even the original appearance of the face must be inferred rather than observed. This is the first problem that follows Homo heidelbergensis from the moment of its birth as a scientific category. A lower jaw can justify naming a specimen, but it cannot easily define an entire population spread across continents and hundreds of thousands of years. The Mauer fossil tells researchers about the shape of one mandible. It says nothing directly about brain size, brow ridges, body proportions, behavior, shelter construction, hunting methods, or ancestry. Most of the characteristics later associated with Homo heidelbergensis come from other fossils discovered elsewhere and added to the category over time. As more remains emerge from Europe, Africa, and parts of Western Asia, scientists begin grouping many Middle Pleistocene humans under the Heidelberg name. These fossils often share some broad traits. Their brains are generally larger than those of earlier Homo erectus populations. Their skulls can be robust, with heavy brow ridges and broad faces. Their bodies, where enough bone survives to judge, appear strong and suited to physically demanding lives. Some specimens seem intermediate between earlier humans and Neanderthals, while others appear closer to the ancestry of Homo sapiens. The apparent usefulness of the label grows precisely because the fossil record is so complicated. Homo heidelbergensis becomes a kind of bridge. filling the long evolutionary interval between Homo erectus and later humans. In older reconstructions, an ancestral population spreads from Africa, occupies much of the Old World, and eventually divides. European groups develop into Neanderthals, perhaps along with Denisovans farther east, while African groups give rise to Homo sapiens. It is a clear and memorable model. Nature, however, rarely preserves such clean boundaries. The Middle Pleistocene lasts for hundreds of thousands of years. Through repeated climatic changes and population movements, groups become isolated, expand, mix, and disappear. Fossils separated by vast distances may resemble each other in some features, while differing sharply in others. Similar anatomy may reflect shared ancestry, adaptation, or the retention of older traits. No single explanation fully accounts for every specimen once placed within Homo heidelbergensis. This uncertainty has produced competing approaches. Some researchers use the name broadly for many humans living roughly between 700,000 and 300,000 years ago. Others restrict it mainly to European fossils resembling the Mauer jaw. Some prefer different names for African specimens, including Homo rhodesiensis, though that label carries its own historical and scientific complications. Still others argue that several European fossils should be viewed as early members of the Neanderthal lineage, rather than as a separate species standing before it. New discoveries continue to strain the older model. Fossils from Morocco, including remains dated to around 773,000 years ago, suggest that the population history leading toward Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans may have involved multiple lineages rather than one unified Heidelberg species. Some Eurasian populations may already belong near the Neanderthal-Denisovan branch. Some African populations may lie closer to the ancestry of modern humans without being the same species as the European Mauer individual. The evidence remains incomplete, but the once simple bridge now resembles a braided river. The name persists because scientific names do more than describe anatomy. They organize discussion. They allow fossils, tools, and sites to be compared. They create a shared language, even when the boundaries of that language remain disputed. Yet a useful label can become misleading when it begins to suggest more certainty than the bone support. Saying that Homo heidelbergensis lived at a site may sound as precise as identifying a modern animal species, when in reality the attribution may rest on geography, age, and a general resemblance rather than a fossil found directly beside the evidence. This matters deeply for the story of early homes. Kalambo Falls contains worked timber, but no identified human remains. Terra Amata contains possible shelter traces but no secure Heidelberg fossil. Boxgrove has human remains often associated with the Heidelberg category. But even there, the classification is part of a wider debate about early Neanderthal ancestry. Schöningen, once confidently assigned to Homo heidelbergensis, may be much younger than previously believed and more likely connected with Neanderthals or a closely related population. The temptation is understandable. A documentary prefers a named builder. A museum reconstruction prefers a recognizable face. A narrative seems stronger when a structure, tool, or hunting site can be assigned to a species. But the deeper truth is more interesting. The people of the Middle Pleistocene may not fit neatly into the boxes created for them. Their biological identities may have shifted across regions, while many of their behavioral solutions were shared, reinvented, or passed between populations. The Mauer jaw remains real, solid, and extraordinary. It belonged to one person who lived beside an ancient river system in Europe more than 500,000 years ago. That individual breathed, ate, moved through a landscape, and belonged to a social group. The jaw offers no direct record of those daily experiences, but its survival gave science a name around which an entire human age could be organized. More than a century later, the name is still spoken, though with greater caution. Homo heidelbergensis may represent a valid species, a regional lineage, a broad grade of human evolution, or a historical container holding fossils that future research will separate. Scholars still debate where its boundaries should be drawn. The jaw from Mauer has not changed, but the story built around it continues to be dismantled and rebuilt. Much like the uncertain shelters attributed to the people of its age, the world inhabited by these Middle Pleistocene humans is not one stable Ice Age landscape, but a restless sequence of transformations. Forests advance across plains and later retreat. Rivers deepen their channels, shift course, or spread into wetlands. Grasslands open where woodland once stood. Temperatures fall over thousands of years, then rise again, sometimes rapidly enough to redraw the geography of survival within a few generations. The people moving through this world do not experience climate as a smooth scientific curve. They experience it as the disappearance of familiar animals, the drying of a spring, the return of winter winds, or the sudden richness of a valley that had once been too cold to occupy. The period associated with Homo heidelbergensis and related populations stretches across repeated glacial and interglacial cycles. Ice sheets expand over northern regions, locking water into glaciers and lowering sea levels. During warmer intervals, forests spread and coastlines move outward or inward as the oceans rise. Britain sometimes becomes part of the European mainland, and at other times is cut off by water. Mediterranean shores shift. River systems create migration corridors, then become barriers. Areas that seem marginal in one climatic phase may become unusually attractive in another. This constant movement of climate helps explain why the archaeological record often appears as a series of occupations rather than one continuous presence. A group may use a valley for generations, perhaps longer, and then vanish from the region when conditions deteriorate. Tens of thousands of years later, another population arrives when the landscape becomes habitable again. The stone tools left behind can make these visits appear connected, but the people who made them may never have known one another and may not belong to the same biological lineage. Western Europe is especially revealing. Older accounts sometimes imagine Homo heidelbergensis spreading steadily across the continent and remaining there as a stable population. More recent research points toward a more uneven history. Human groups appear in pulses, shaped by temperature, food availability, population size, and the accessibility of routes from southern refuges. Some occupations may last only during favorable windows. Others may endure through colder phases in protected regions. Scholars still debate how frequently Europe was abandoned altogether, and how much continuity existed between successive populations. The animals around these humans are equally dynamic. On open grasslands, horses, large bovids, and other herd animals move across broad territories. In wooded environments, deer, wild cattle, and boar become more important. Straight-tusked elephants, rhinoceroses, and other immense mammals occupy parts of Europe during warmer periods. Predators include lions, hyenas, wolves, and powerful bears. A single landscape may contain creatures that modern observers mentally separate into different worlds. Because Pleistocene ecosystems do not follow the boundaries familiar today. These animals are not simply prey or danger. They are sources of information. Herd movements reveal water and seasonal change. Scavenging birds may signal a carcass. Predator tracks warn of contested ground. The arrival or absence of a particular species can indicate whether a region is becoming colder, drier, wetter, or more wooded. For people without written maps, the behavior of animals becomes part of the map. Plants matter just as much, though they preserve less visibly. Roots, tubers, nuts, fruit, seeds, leaves, and inner bark may all contribute to survival. Wood supplies fuel, tool material, structural elements, and possibly bedding or windbreaks. Some species burn more reliably than others. Some split cleanly for tool making. Others resist decay or provide flexible branches. The ability to recognize these differences turns a forest from a mass of trees into a storehouse of specialized materials. At Gesher Beno Yaakov, beside an ancient lake in what is now Israel, charcoal from deposits around 780,000 years old suggests that early humans repeatedly used fire in a resource-rich environment. The remains indicate access to particular woods growing around the lakeshore, and raise the possibility that people selected places partly because fuel was available nearby. The evidence does not reveal a fully planned settlement in the modern sense, but it shows that choosing a living place may already involve more than finding water and food. A good location must also support fire. Fire changes the value of a landscape. A lakeshore with abundant fish and plants may be less useful if fuel is scarce. A sheltered terrace with wood nearby may offer greater security than an exposed plain rich in game. Dry branches collected at the right time can mean warmth after sunset, light for tool repair, and a protected area around which people gather. Wet fuel produces smoke and unreliable heat. A group that understands local vegetation can reduce these risks. The land itself also determines what can be built. At Kalambo Falls, waterlogged conditions later preserved timber, but during occupation the environment offers heavy wood, flowing water, and ground that may become saturated. Placing joined trunks over damp or unstable surfaces could create a platform or working area above mud. At Terra Amata, the Mediterranean setting provides access to shore resources, stone, fuel, and open spaces repeatedly used by human groups. At Boxgrove, a coastal plain and freshwater setting create an attractive place for animals and therefore for hunters and scavengers. None of these sites should be imagined as permanent villages standing unchanged for centuries. Their usefulness depends on season and climate. A lakeshore can flood, a riverbank can erode, a sheltered hollow can become dangerously cold when prevailing winds shift. An area rich in animals during migration may become nearly empty at another time of year. Survival requires leaving at the right moment as much as arriving at the right one. Mobility is therefore not evidence of failure to settle. It is an adaptation to abundance that moves. A group carrying stone tools, wooden implements, hides, food, and knowledge can follow seasonal opportunities more effectively than one tied to a single place. Yet mobility does not prevent the creation of temporary order. A camp can be established, used intensively, repaired, and abandoned without becoming permanent. Repeated occupation may leave several layers of activity that archaeologists later compress into one apparent event. This compression creates difficult problems. A hearth, a cluster of stone flakes, and a line of post holes may not all belong to the same day or even the same generation. Water can move bones. Animals can disturb sediment. Later occupants may reuse the same favourable spot. What appears to be the floor of one shelter may represent several episodes superimposed. the evidence remains incomplete because landscapes continue to act long after people leave. Even so, certain patterns return. Humans prefer places where different resources meet shorelines, river terraces, woodland edges, springs, and migration routes. These boundary zones offer variety but also risk. Floods are more likely near water. Predators follow herds. Exposed edges provide visibility but little protection. The best location is rarely perfect. It is a compromise between access and safety. One lesser-known feature of this world is how often coastlines themselves disappear from the record. During colder periods, sea levels fall, exposing broad plains that later drown when glaciers melt. Some of the most favourable territories for human movement and occupation may now lie beneath the sea. The surviving archaeological map is therefore incomplete, not only because sites decay, but because entire landscapes have vanished underwater. The places archaeologists study are only the fragments still accessible. This missing geography matters when reconstructing migration. Populations may have moved along coastal plains that no longer exist, crossed river systems in positions now buried beneath sediment, or occupied lowlands later erased by erosion. A gap between two known sites may reflect a real absence, but it may also reflect the destruction of the route connecting them. The unstable climate also shapes bodies and behaviour. Colder regions reward efficient heat conservation, strong cooperation, and reliable access to calories. Seasonal scarcity favours planning. Unpredictable resources increase the value of social knowledge carried by older members of a group. The location of water, the timing of herds, and the properties of different woods cannot be rediscovered from nothing each year. They must be learned and transmitted. In this way, the environment becomes part of culture. A river is not merely water, it is a route, a hazard, and a calendar. A stand of trees is not merely cover, it is fuel, construction material, and memory. A recurring campsite is not simply ground. It is a known solution to an old problem. Even if no wall survives, the decision to return reveals that the place has become meaningful. The Middle Pleistocene world never stops changing, but the people within it are not passive victims of climate. They observe, remember, adjust, and sometimes rebuild. Their homes, where they exist, are temporary answers to moving conditions. Their deeper achievement is not permanence. It is the ability to make a livable centre inside a landscape that refuses to remain the same. The people moving through these unstable landscapes do not leave behind portraits. Their faces must be rebuilt from fragments, a jaw from one place, part of a skull from another, a thigh bone from a third, sometimes separated by thousands of kilometres and hundreds of thousands of years. From these pieces, researchers attempt to answer a deceptively difficult question. What did the humans commonly called Homo heidelbergensis actually look like? The simplest answer is that they were robust, large-brained people who combined older human traits with features later seen in Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. The more accurate answer is that no single appearance fits every fossil assigned to the name. Some skulls have broad faces and massive brow ridges. Some show shapes approaching early Neanderthals. Others retain features closer to earlier Homo. The category brings together individuals who may not all have belonged to one biological population, and every reconstruction must carry that uncertainty. The Mauer jaw remains the original reference point. It is thick and powerful, without the projecting chin typical of modern humans. Its strength does not mean its owner spent every waking hour biting through impossibly tough food. Jaw shape reflects inheritance, growth, muscle use, and the overall architecture of the face. The teeth are relatively modest compared with the massive bone supporting them, a combination that made the specimen difficult to place from the beginning. Other fossils added much of the image now associated with Homo heidelbergensis. The skull from Kabwe in Zambia, historically called Broken Hill 1, has a large brain case, a broad face, and one of the heaviest brow ridges known among human fossils. It has often been placed within Homo heidelbergensis or Homo rhodesiensis. Though its classification remains disputed, European specimens from sites such as Arago in France, Petralona in Greece, and Cima de los Huesos in Spain have also entered the debate, but they do not form one perfectly uniform group. The brow ridge is among the most striking features. In many specimens it forms a thick bar above the eyes, sometimes divided into distinct arches and sometimes appearing more continuous. This structure may have helped distribute forces across the face, but explanations based only on mechanical stress remain incomplete. It may also have been shaped by facial growth and inherited anatomy. Researchers should resist the familiar temptation to turn every dramatic feature into a direct adaptation with one simple purpose. Behind the brow, the brain case is larger than in many earlier humans. Estimates vary by specimen, but brain volumes often fall within or near the lower part of the modern human range. Brain size alone does not reveal intelligence, language, creativity, or social complexity. A large brain leaves no direct record of what its owner thought. Yet when considered alongside complex stoneworking, wooden technology, repeated site use, and coordinated food processing, it becomes part of a broader pattern of advanced behavioral capacity. The skulls are usually long and relatively low compared with the more rounded cranium of modern Homo sapiens. Their bones can be thick, and the rear of the skull may be strongly built. Faces often project more than modern human faces, though less than in some earlier species. Noses may have been broad, particularly in populations adapting to Eurasian climates, but soft tissue cannot be reconstructed with certainty from bone alone. Their bodies appear equally powerful. The partial skeleton from Boxgrove includes a robust shin bone whose structure suggests an individual accustomed to heavy physical demands. Other Middle Pleistocene remains indicate strong limbs, thick joint surfaces, and substantial muscle attachments. These people travel on foot through broken terrain, carry tools and food, process large animals, cut wood, and repeatedly perform tasks requiring force and endurance. Their skeletons record lives without mechanical assistance. Robustness, however, should not be confused with clumsiness. A strongly built body can still move with precision and speed. The creation of symmetrical hand axes requires fine control of angle, force, and sequence. Shaping wood demands careful strikes and an understanding of grain. A person capable of cutting a fitting notch into a heavy trunk or producing a balanced wooden implement is not simply powerful. That person possesses coordination, patience, and a mental model of the finished object. Body size may also vary between regions and sexes, though the fossil sample is too incomplete to describe this confidently. Some individuals were probably similar in height to average modern humans, while others may have been taller or shorter. Their broad chests and muscular frames are often reconstructed from later Neanderthal anatomy, but not every Heidelberg-associated population necessarily shared the same proportions. Climate likely influenced some regional differences. Populations living in colder environments may have benefited from bodies that conserved heat, including relatively broad trunks and shorter extremities. Those in warmer African settings may have retained different proportions. Yet the evidence remains incomplete, and many reconstructions combine fossils that may not belong together. A body built from a European pelvis, an African skull, and assumptions derived from Neanderthals can look convincing while representing no actual person who ever lived. Their skin, hair, and eye colour remain largely unknown. Genetic evidence gives far more detail for later Neanderthals and Denisovans than for fossils usually called Homo heidelbergensis. African populations likely carried pigmentation suited to strong ultraviolet exposure, while Eurasian populations may have experienced different selective pressures over time, but precise shades cannot be recovered from bone, and illustrations that give every individual the same dark hair, heavy beard, or fixed complexion often reflect artistic convention rather than evidence. The same uncertainty surrounds their voices, the anatomy of the skull base, breathing system, hearing, and later human relatives suggest that communication was probably sophisticated, but no fossil can preserve a vocabulary. Group hunting, tool teaching, food sharing, and repeated occupation would be easier with rich vocal and gestural communication. Still, it is safer to say they probably possessed complex communication than to claim they spoke a language equivalent to any modern one. Their faces may have carried expressions recognizable today. Brow movement would have been affected by the heavy bone above the eyes, but the muscles of the face still allowed signals of attention, tension, reassurance, and social intent. Hands, posture, gaze, and sound would all contribute to communication. A face does not need to look modern to participate in deeply human social life. Injury and disease offer another view of the body. Broken bones, damaged teeth, joint wear, and signs of repeated stress reveal that survival demanded resilience. Some individuals lived long enough for serious injuries to heal, suggesting that they could remain within a group while recovering. Care should not be romanticized beyond the evidence, but survival after impairment often implies tolerance, food sharing, or reduced danger through social support. The most important anatomical lesson is therefore not that Homo heidelbergensis possessed one fixed set of features. It is that Middle Pleistocene humanity was already diverse. Different populations occupied Africa and Eurasia, separated and reconnected as climates changed. Their bodies carried mixtures of ancient traits, regional adaptations, and features pointing toward later lineages. This diversity explains why classification remains so difficult. A fossil showing early Neanderthal traits may be called Homo heidelbergensis by one researcher and an archaic Neanderthal by another. An African skull may be treated as part of the same widespread species, or assigned to a separate lineage closer to Homo sapiens. The disagreement is not merely about names. It concerns how human populations were structured, how often they mixed, and whether evolution proceeded through clean species replacements or overlapping regional branches. The old image of one widespread transitional species may be giving way to a more complex picture. Instead of a single population standing midway between Homo erectus and later humans, there may have been several related groups evolving in different directions. Some contribute to Neanderthals, some lie near Denisovan ancestry, some may be closer to the roots of Homo sapiens, others may leave no known descendants at all. What survives in the record suggests not one standardized Heidelberg body, but a human mosaic: heavy jaws, large brains, powerful limbs, regional faces, and uncertain identities belong to people living through a crucial stage of human evolution. Their anatomy does not provide a clean label. It reveals a branching world where the familiar forms of later humanity are beginning to emerge without yet separating into the categories recognized today. A powerful skeleton is not merely an anatomical description, it is a record of work. Every thickened joint, every strong muscle attachment, and every worn surface preserves part of a life spent moving through landscapes without roads, sheltering walls, pack animals, or stored food waiting at the end of the day. The humans of the Middle Pleistocene survive because their bodies can repeatedly absorb strain, but endurance alone is not enough. They must also decide when to move, what to carry, how much energy to spend, and when a promising route has become too dangerous to follow. Their daily distances cannot be measured directly, yet the geography of their lives demands mobility. Stone suitable for making hand axes may lie far from a butchery site. Water may be dependable in one season and absent in another. Herd animals shift across plains. Firewood must be gathered again and again, often before darkness or rain makes the task more difficult. A temporary living place may contain objects brought from several different parts of the landscape, showing that its occupants understand a territory larger than the ground visible from the camp. Walking is therefore one of their most important technologies. Their feet and legs carry knowledge between locations. A route is remembered not as a line on a map, but as a sequence of landmarks, slopes, river crossings, feeding grounds, and places where stone can be collected. Strong lower limbs help people traverse uneven surfaces, but successful travel depends just as much on pacing. Moving too quickly wastes energy. Carrying too much reduces speed. Arriving after dark increases risk. The body is always part of a calculation. The Boxgrove shin bone offers a rare glimpse of such physical demands. It belonged to a strongly built individual living in southern Britain around 480,000 years ago. The bone's robust structure suggests substantial muscle development and repeated loading during life. Yet one leg cannot define an entire population. It shows what one person's body endured, not a universal Heidelberg form. Even so, the specimen fits a wider pattern in which Middle Pleistocene humans appear capable of sustained movement and intense physical labour. A large animal carcass turns that strength into immediate survival. Processing a horse, deer, or larger mammal requires more than cutting meat from exposed areas. The body must be repositioned, skin must be pulled taut and separated, limbs are opened at the joints, bones may be broken for marrow. Meat and usable parts are carried away before predators arrive or decay begins. Several people working together can complete these tasks more efficiently. But cooperation does not remove the physical burden, it redistributes it. At Boxgrove, the near-complete processing of a horse appears to have involved numerous linked activities carried out in a concentrated area. Stone was shaped, cutting edges were used, bones were opened, and some bone fragments became tools themselves. The pattern suggests a group able to organize work around a valuable but temporary resource. A carcass cannot be postponed indefinitely. Its usefulness declines with every passing hour, while the smell travels outward through the landscape. This pressure favors bodies capable of force and minds capable of sequence. A hand axe must be held steadily while resisting tissue and hide. A hammerstone must strike hard enough to fracture bone without destroying every useful piece. Wooden implements must be shaped through repeated impacts that are powerful but controlled. These activities reward strength in the hands, shoulders, back, and legs, but they also punish poor technique. Efficiency matters because calories spent on processing food must not exceed the calories gained from it. The energetic demands of large brains add another difficulty. Brain tissue is expensive to maintain, requiring a dependable share of the body's energy even at rest. Middle Pleistocene humans with enlarged brains must support those organs through diets that are sufficiently rich and reliable. Animal fat, marrow, meat, plant foods, roots, seeds, and seasonal resources may all contribute. No single menu applies across Africa and Eurasia because available foods change with latitude, habitat, and season. In colder environments, the cost of survival rises. The body must maintain its temperature while wind and dampness draw heat away. A robust frame may help conserve warmth, especially if combined with shelter, fire, hides, and close social proximity. Yet anatomy alone cannot make northern occupation safe. Even a cold-adapted body becomes vulnerable when soaked, exhausted, or deprived of calories. The true adaptation is a system in which physiology, technology, and group behavior reinforce one another. Fire becomes part of that system, though its use is not equally secure at every site. Reliable fire reduces the amount of heat the body must produce, extends useful activity after sunset, and may make some foods easier to consume. It can dry materials and create a visible center within a temporary camp. But fire also demands labor. Fuel must be gathered, transported, protected from moisture, and replenished. A large fire provides more warmth but consumes more wood. A small fire is efficient but offers limited protection against cold. Human bodies must therefore perform the work that keeps fire alive. Arms carry branches, hands strip bark or break smaller pieces, backs bend repeatedly, eyes monitor sparks and smoke. Someone must remain attentive when others rest. What appears archaeologically as a patch of charcoal may represent hours of coordinated effort and a detailed understanding of local fuel. Warm climates impose different pressures. Heat increases the need for water and makes midday exertion costly. Shade, air movement, and access to wet ground become important. At Kalambo Falls, timber may have been used partly to make a saturated environment more usable. A raised or stabilized surface could reduce direct contact with mud and water, preserve working materials, and create firmer footing. The exact function remains uncertain, but the construction shows that bodies do not merely endure difficult ground. People can redesign the surface beneath them. Hands are central to this transformation. The human grip combines power with precision, allowing a stone edge to be guided through wood or a heavy object to be manipulated into position. Shaping the notched timber at Kalambo Falls would have required repeated cutting at a planned location. The maker had to anticipate how the two pieces would meet before the work was complete. Physical effort was directed by an idea. The same union of strength and foresight appears in the wooden tools from Marathousa I in Greece, dated to roughly 430,000 years ago. At least one object may have functioned as a digging stick. Such a tool seems modest beside a spear, but digging is an important survival activity. It can expose roots and tubers, reach resources in wet soil, loosen earth, or assist with tasks around a repeatedly used place. The surprising detail is not simply that wood was used, it is that different pieces of wood were selected and shaped for different jobs, most of which leave almost no archaeological trace. This lost wooden technology would have extended the body's abilities. A digging stick concentrates force into the soil. A throwing stick carries impact beyond arm's reach. A spear creates distance between hunter and animal. A lever helps move weight. A wooden support stabilizes an uncertain surface. Stone tools survive in enormous numbers, but they may represent only the durable edge of a much broader technological world. Injury was an unavoidable cost of such lives. A misjudged blow could damage a hand. A fall on rough ground could disable a leg. Close contact with large animals carried obvious danger, even without imagining dramatic hunting scenes unsupported by evidence. Teeth wore, joints deteriorated, and old wounds could restrict movement. The evidence for care remains uneven, but individuals who survive significant impairment likely benefited from group tolerance and shared resources. A person temporarily unable to travel at full speed could become a burden only if the group treated survival as an individual contest. Human cooperation changes that equation. Food can be carried, tasks can be adjusted, knowledge can remain valuable even when physical capacity declines. An experienced individual may know where water persists during dry periods, which wood burns when damp, or how to recognize a dangerous change in weather. A strong group is not merely a collection of strong bodies. Regional variation would have made these survival systems different from place to place. African populations encounter heat, shifting rainfall, woodland, grassland, and river environments. European groups face colder seasons, changing coastlines, and repeated population contractions. Western Asian corridors connect habitats that vary sharply over relatively short distances. The people grouped under one species name may have carried distinct physiques and distinct solutions. Scholars still debate how much of their robustness reflects climate, ancestry, activity, or some combination of all three. Bones respond to use, but inherited growth patterns also shape them. A heavy skeleton is not a simple measurement of hardship, and a large muscle attachment cannot reveal one precise behavior. What survives in the record suggests lives of exceptional physical demand, but it does not reduce these people to brute strength. Their bodies succeed because they are guided by memory, skill, and cooperation. Muscle moves the timber, but planning determines where it goes. Legs cross the landscape, but knowledge selects the route. Hands strike the stone, but experience controls the fracture. The true survival adaptation is neither anatomy nor intelligence alone. It is the connection between them, repeated through countless ordinary actions until a dangerous landscape becomes familiar enough to inhabit. A home does not need to survive as a wall. In the Middle Pleistocene, most living places are made from materials almost designed to disappear. Branches decay, hides rot, grass bedding compresses into soil, wind scatters ash, floodwater rearranges bone and stone. Even caves, which seem permanent, preserve only the traces left on their floors, not the routines that once gave those spaces meaning. Archaeologists searching for early homes are therefore rarely looking for buildings in the modern sense. They are looking for patterns where fire was placed, where tools were made, where animals were processed, where people repeatedly returned, and whether the distribution of remains suggests that activities were organized rather than random. Natural shelters are the most obvious starting point. A cave offers a roof, shade, protection from rain, and a defensible interior. A rock overhang provides many of the same advantages without enclosing its occupants completely. Yet caves are not automatically ideal homes. They can be damp, smoky, difficult to illuminate, and occupied by bears, hyenas, or other predators. Their entrances may face cold winds. Water may drip from ceilings or collect on uneven floors. A deep chamber offers protection but also darkness, poor ventilation, and limited visibility. The usefulness of a cave depends on season, orientation, drainage, nearby resources, and whether the space can be controlled. For mobile groups, an open-air camp may often be more practical. Lake shores, river terraces, woodland edges, and sheltered coastal plains provide access to food and raw materials without the constraints of a cave. These places are exposed, but exposure brings advantages. Smoke disperses more easily. Large carcasses can be processed in open space. Several people can work at once. Approaching animals or predators can be seen from a distance. A temporary windbreak, screen, or light shelter may be enough to make such a place usable for a few nights or a season. The difficulty is proving that such structures existed. A line of stones may have supported posts, but it may also result from natural movement. Dark patches may be hearths, yet later fires or chemical changes can imitate them. Post holes can be difficult to distinguish from root cavities. Patterns of stone flakes may reflect organized activity, or they may have been shifted by water, trampling, or excavation methods. The evidence remains incomplete because the archaeologist is reconstructing an arrangement after hundreds of thousands of years of disturbance. Terra Amata, on the Mediterranean coast at what is now Nice, remains one of the most famous examples. The site dates to roughly 400,000 years ago and appears to contain repeated episodes of occupation. Archaeologists found stone tools, animal remains, traces of fire, and distributions of stones and possible post holes that were interpreted as the foundations of oval shelters. Reconstructions often show long, curved huts made from branches, perhaps covered with hides or vegetation, with a hearth near the centre. These images are compelling, but they are models rather than preserved buildings. No complete wooden frame survived. The proposed outlines depend on how post holes, stones, and artifact concentrations are interpreted. Some researchers accept that temporary shelters were likely present, while others are more cautious about the exact shape, size, and number of structures. What survives in the record suggests organized occupation, but not every detail of the familiar hut reconstruction can be treated as certain. Recent work at Terra Amata strengthens the picture of repeated, deliberate use of the place. The inhabitants selected and managed limestone pebbles in different ways depending on their form and quality. They did not simply collect whatever stone happened to lie nearby. Some pieces were transported, tested, modified, and used for specific tasks. Animal remains and signs of processing show that the site functioned as more than a brief stopping point. Fire, tools, food, and raw materials were brought together within a favourable coastal setting. This organisation matters because a living place is defined as much by activity as by architecture. A group may return to the same area because it offers fresh water, stone, fuel, and access to animals. Over time, the location becomes known. People understand where water drains, where wind is strongest, where fire can be maintained, and where carcasses can be processed without contaminating sleeping areas. Even if a shelter lasts only a few days, knowledge of the site may last across generations. A hearth often becomes the clearest centre of such a place. Fire creates warmth, light, and a barrier of smoke. It also imposes structure. People cannot sleep directly in the sparks. Fuel must be stored close enough to reach, but far enough to avoid accidental ignition. Food preparation occurs within useful distance of heat. Smoke direction influences where people sit. A hearth therefore organizes space even without walls. At some sites, repeated burning in the same area suggests that people returned to an established arrangement. They may have cleared old ash, added new fuel, or selected a location already known to be dry and protected. At others, scattered burning may reflect brief use or the movement of fire across a surface. Scholars still debate how consistently early Middle Pleistocene populations controlled fire, especially in regions where evidence is sparse or ambiguous, yet where repeated hearths are secure. They reveal a powerful shift heat is no longer only found in natural fires, but maintained within a chosen place. The boundary of a camp may have been subtle. One area contains dense stone flakes from tool production. Another holds butchered bone. A cleaner zone may indicate resting or sleeping, though such interpretations are difficult to prove. Broken tools and discarded edges accumulate where work occurs. Heavy hammer stones remain near carcass processing areas because carrying them away offers little advantage. Lighter, valuable tools may leave with the group, creating an archaeological record dominated by waste rather than possessions. This means the most important objects are often missing. Hides used as coverings are gone. Wooden frames decay. Containers made from bark, skin, or woven fibers vanish. Bedding leaves only faint chemical or botanical traces, if any. Personal items may have been carried away. The floor of a camp is therefore like a room after nearly everything useful has been removed and the walls have dissolved. Boxgrove illustrates another kind of temporary centre. The horse processing area there may have been used intensively over a very short period, perhaps within a single day. Stone tools were made beside the carcass, meat was removed, bones were opened, and usable materials were taken. It may not have been a home in any architectural sense, but for several hours it became an organised human space. Work was concentrated, tasks overlapped, and the group altered the site through coordinated action. This distinction between camp, work site, and home is partly modern. For highly mobile people, the same location may serve all three functions at different moments. A lakeshore can be a hunting station during one visit and a sleeping place during another. A sheltered terrace may hold a hearth, tool-making area, and food processing zone without any structure recognizable as a house. The categories blur because life is organized around movement rather than permanent property. Kalambo Falls extends this idea further. The joined timbers demonstrate construction, but their purpose remains unknown. If they formed part of a raised platform, they may have created a dry working or resting surface over wet ground. If they supported a walkway, they made movement through a saturated area safer. If they belong to a larger structure, most of it has disappeared. In every possibility, the central act is the same humans modified the surface to suit their needs. Such modification does not require a long-term settlement. A platform can be useful for a season. A windbreak can be abandoned after one storm. A screen of branches can protect a fire for a few nights. A circle of stones can stabilize posts and later be reused by another group. The earliest architecture may have been designed with no expectation of permanence. That does not make it simple. Choosing the right branches, setting supports, balancing weight, and positioning a structure against wind all require experience. The builders must understand materials and anticipate conditions. A poorly placed shelter fills with smoke or collapses under rain. A platform built too low remains wet. A windbreak facing the wrong direction becomes useless. Successful construction reflects accumulated knowledge, even when the result leaves almost no trace. The first human homes may therefore have been less like buildings and more like repeated decisions. Clear this ground. Place the fire here. Keep the cutting area there. Raise useful materials above the mud. Use the trees to block the wind. Return when the season is right. None of these actions creates a permanent village. but together they create something unmistakably human, a space arranged around shared needs. Long before walls divide rooms and roofs define ownership, people begin to make temporary centres in an unstable world. They do not conquer the landscape. They negotiate with it, borrowing dry ground, warmth, and safety for as long as conditions allow. These shelters disappear, but the pattern remains wherever humans stay, even briefly. They begin turning space into place. Fire leaves a stronger impression on the imagination than almost any other trace of early human life. A circle of flame turns darkness into a boundary, warms bodies, hardens wood, changes food, and gives a group a visible centre. It seems so fundamental that it is tempting to imagine every Middle Pleistocene camp glowing beneath the night sky. Archaeology offers a more uneven picture. Fire was certainly known, used, and in some places repeatedly maintained, but the evidence does not show that every population controlled it equally well or carried it reliably through every landscape. Natural fires had long existed before humans began managing them. Lightning ignited dry grass and woodland. Volcanic activity and other natural processes created flames that animals approached cautiously and humans could exploit. The difficult transition was not simply discovering that fire produced heat, it was learning how to preserve it, feed it, transport embers, choose fuel, and perhaps create ignition when no natural flame was available. Each stage demands different knowledge, and the archaeological record rarely reveals which abilities were present at a particular site. A burned bone or blackened stone is not automatically proof of a hearth. Wildfire can alter sediments. Organic material may darken through chemical processes. Heat can move through deposits after burial. Even when burning is human-associated, it may represent one opportunistic event rather than regular control. Researchers look for repeated concentrations of ash, charcoal, heated stone, and burned remains positioned within activity areas. The strongest cases show patterns difficult to explain through natural fire alone. Gesher Beno Yaakov, beside the ancient waters of the Jordan Valley, provides some of the most important evidence. Deposits around 780,000 years old contain burned flint, plant material, and charcoal distributed in concentrated areas. The site predates many fossils commonly assigned to Homo heidelbergensis, so it cannot be used as a straightforward record of that species. Its importance lies in showing that much earlier human populations were already organizing activities around fire in a resource-rich lakeshore environment. Recent analysis of charcoal from the site adds a quieter but revealing detail. The people using the lakeshore appear to have burned woods available in the surrounding environment, and their choices may reflect both accessibility and practical knowledge. Fuel is not an abstract resource. Different woods ignite differently, produce different amounts of heat, smoke, and ash, and behave differently when damp. Selecting a camp near usable firewood may have been as important as locating water or stone. A place with abundant food but poor fuel can become dangerous after sunset. A wooded shoreline may offer branches, but recently fallen wood can be wet. Dead standing timber burns differently from green wood. Small twigs ignite quickly but disappear fast. Dense wood lasts longer but requires more effort to gather and divide. The ability to maintain fire depends on reading the surrounding vegetation in ways that leave little direct trace. Once established, a hearth transforms the body's relationship with climate. Without fire, warmth comes from metabolism, movement, shelter, clothing, shared body heat, and the insulating qualities of bedding. With fire, people can remain less active while maintaining temperature, especially during cold evenings. Damp materials can be dried, hands stiffened by cold regain dexterity. A group can occupy places that would otherwise demand greater physical energy or become unusable during certain seasons. Yet fire does not erase environmental limits. Wind can scatter sparks and draw heat away. Rain can overwhelm an exposed flame. Smoke trapped beneath a poorly designed shelter can make the interior intolerable. Fuel gathering consumes time and calories. A hearth left unattended may die, while one built carelessly may spread beyond control. Fire is not merely a benefit, it is a responsibility requiring attention. This responsibility may have shaped social routines. Someone adds fuel while others work. Someone notices when the wind shifts. Embers are protected beneath ash or carried to a new place. The group must decide whether to preserve a fire through the night or allow it to fade. These activities do not require fixed roles, but they create repeated tasks around which cooperation can develop. The hearth also changes time. Daylight no longer sets an absolute limit on useful activity. Stone edges can be examined and repaired in the glow. Wooden tools can be scraped, straightened, or prepared for the next day. Food can be divided after dark. Social contact continues when the surrounding landscape becomes difficult to see. The circle of light contracts the world, bringing attention inward toward faces, hands, objects, and sound. It is easy to turn this scene into a modern family gathered around a fireplace, but the evidence cannot support such a precise reconstruction. The people may sit, crouch, work, rest, or remain alert. Smoke, insects, wind, and the uneven ground make the experience less comfortable than museum displays suggest. Still, repeated fire use creates conditions in which communication and observation can continue beyond daylight. Cooking is another likely advantage, though its history is older and more disputed than any single Middle Pleistocene site can resolve. Heat softens some plant tissues, changes meat, reduces certain pathogens, and makes some foods easier to chew and digest. It can also destroy nutrients, burn valuable calories, or require fuel not worth spending. Not every food benefits equally. The presence of fire does not prove that every meal was cooked, but habitual access would widen the range of choices available. Fire can also assist with technology. Wooden points may be dried or carefully hardened, though dramatic claims about fire-hardened spears must be tied to direct evidence rather than assumed. Adhesives, pigments, and other materials can be altered by heat, especially in later periods. Stone itself may fracture when heated, deliberately or accidentally. At a basic level, warmth makes prolonged woodworking and tool repair easier during cold conditions. Protection from predators is often presented as an obvious benefit, but it should not be exaggerated. Many animals avoid flames and smoke, yet hungry or habituated predators may still approach a camp. Fire increases visibility and creates a deterrent, but it does not form an impenetrable wall. A group must remain aware of movement beyond the light, where eyes may reflect briefly and disappear. The strongest protection may come from the combination of fire and social presence. Several adults gathered in one place, holding wooden implements and maintaining light, present a more difficult target than an isolated person in darkness. The hearth concentrates bodies and attention. It creates a defended center without requiring permanent walls. A Terra Amata, traces interpreted as hearths lie within areas of repeated occupation and possible shelter construction. These features support the idea that fire helped organize the site. Though the exact arrangement of huts and hearths remains debated, If temporary structures stood there, their builders had to balance warmth against ventilation. A central fire might distribute heat, but smoke would rise into coverings made from branches, hides, or vegetation. An entrance or opening would need to channel air, whether by deliberate design or practical adjustment learned through experience. The ability to manage smoke is itself a form of architectural knowledge. A shelter that blocks every draft may become unlivable once a fire is lit. One that allows too much airflow loses heat. The position of a hearth relative to walls, openings, and prevailing wind determines whether the structure succeeds. No written plan is needed. Repetition teaches what works. At open-air sites, the hearth may have functioned as the only stable feature. Shelters can be dismantled or decay, but a burned patch remains. People may arrange sleeping places, food processing, and tool-making around it. Its location becomes a reference point. Even after the fire dies, ash marks where the group gathered and where new flame might be started on a later visit. Charcoal also preserves a record of landscapes otherwise lost. Tiny fragments can reveal which trees grew nearby, what fuel people selected, and whether vegetation changed over time. A hearth is therefore both a human feature and an environmental archive. Through it, archaeologists reconstruct not only behavior, but the woods, wetlands, and climatic conditions surrounding the camp. Scholars still debate how frequently Middle Pleistocene groups used fire, and whether some northern populations survived long periods without dependable control. The archaeological silence at a site may mean fire was absent, but it may also mean the evidence was destroyed. Ash is fragile. Charcoal can wash away. Short occupations may leave almost nothing. A fire built on exposed ground can disappear within a season, while one protected by sediment may endure for hundreds of thousands of years. What survives suggests a patchwork rather than a single moment of mastery. Some groups use fire repeatedly and organize space around it. Others may rely on it intermittently. Skills can be lost when populations shrink or disappear from a region. New groups may arrive with different traditions. Human progress does not move in a straight line from discovery to permanent possession. Even so, wherever fire becomes reliable, the meaning of shelter changes. A roof no longer provides only cover from rain. It must cooperate with heat and smoke. A campsite no longer ends completely at sunset. A cold landscape becomes slightly more negotiable. Wood becomes both building material and stored warmth. The hearth draws scattered activities into one shared center. There, in the unstable light, the earliest homes become more than barriers against weather. They become places where time is extended. Food is transformed, tools are prepared, and bodies remain together after darkness closes over the land. The flames themselves rarely survive, but their influence can be seen in the way human space begins to gather around them. Fire gathers people into a center, but tools extend that center outward. A hearth may warm the body, yet stone and wood allow the body to cut, dig, shape, pierce, carry, scrape, and build. Much of Middle Pleistocene survival depends on this partnership between materials. Stone provides durable edges and striking surfaces. Wood provides reach, flexibility, leverage, and structure. One survives abundantly in the archaeological record. The other usually disappears, leaving the false impression that early human technology was made almost entirely from rock. The most recognizable stone object of this world is the Acheulean hand axe. Its name suggests a simple chopping tool held in the hand, but the category includes a wide variety of shapes, sizes, and levels of refinement. Some are broad and heavy. Others are thin, pointed, and carefully symmetrical. They can cut hide, separate joints, slice meat, shape wood, break smaller bones, or perform several tasks in sequence. Their usefulness lies partly in versatility. Making one begins with selecting suitable stone. Not every lump will fracture predictably. Grain, internal flaws, shape, and hardness matter. A skilled toolmaker examines the raw material, turns it, tests angles, and anticipates how one strike will affect the next. Large flakes are removed first to establish the form. Smaller adjustments thin the edges and correct imbalance. A poorly placed blow can remove too much material or split the piece. The finished object is therefore not created by force alone but by controlled reduction. Symmetry is especially revealing. A roughly functional cutting edge can be produced without shaping both faces evenly. Yet many Schöningen tools are carefully balanced. This may improve handling and edge maintenance, but may also reflect learned standards within a group. The maker appears to hold a mental image of the desired result and work toward it through a sequence of decisions. Scholars still debate whether symmetry carried social or aesthetic meaning, but it clearly demonstrates planning beyond immediate fracture. The process also creates knowledge that must be transmitted. A beginner can watch an experienced person choose a striking platform, adjust grip, and change the angle of impact. Some lessons can be learned by imitation. Others may require gesture, demonstration, correction, and vocal instruction. Stone napping is unforgiving. The wrong blow does not merely look untidy, it can ruin valuable material or injure the hand. At a repeatedly used place, stoneworking leaves dense concentrations of flakes. These fragments allow archaeologists to reconstruct the sequence of manufacture, sometimes fitting pieces back together like a broken three-dimensional puzzle. Refitting reveals whether a tool was made from start to finish at the site, partially shaped elsewhere, or repaired after use. It can also show how people move through a working area and whether several individuals napped near one another. Terra Amata provides a good example of technological flexibility. Recent analysis of limestone pebbles shows that inhabitants selected and managed raw material in more than one way. Some stones were used because their natural form already suited a task. Others were modified more extensively. This diversity suggests practical judgment rather than rigid dependence on one method. The people using the site understood that different materials demanded different strategies. Stone tools, however, are often only the tools that made other tools. A sharp flake can scrape bark, cut a notch, thin a shaft, or smooth a wooden surface. Once the wooden object is complete, the stone edge may be resharpened or discarded while the finished implement leaves the site. If the wood later decays, archaeology preserves the manufacturing debris but not the main product. Kalambo Falls offers a rare escape from that pattern. The crossed timbers preserved there show large-scale woodworking at least about 476,000 years ago. One trunk was cut with a notch, allowing it to fit over another. The task required selecting heavy pieces, moving them, cutting through resistant fibers, and testing the join. The workers were not merely sharpening a stick, they are modifying substantial timber to create a stable relationship between separate elements. The precise structure remains unknown, but the join itself demonstrates an understanding of shape and support. A notch must be positioned correctly. It must be deep enough to hold, but not so deep that the timber weakens. The surfaces must meet in a way that reduces slipping. These decisions suggest construction carried out according to a plan, even if the completed form cannot be recovered. Other wooden objects from Kalambo Falls, dating to later phases between roughly 309,000 and 324,000 years ago. Broaden the picture further. They include worked pieces whose functions may have varied. Together they show that the site was not an isolated accident in which one log happened to be cut unusually. Woodworking formed part of a durable technological tradition. Marathousa 1 in Greece adds another surprising dimension. Wooden handheld tools from around 430,000 years ago include an object interpreted as a possible digging stick. Such implements would be useful for loosening soil, reaching underground plant foods, working wet ground, or carrying out tasks around a camp. Their importance lies partly in their ordinariness. A digging tool may contribute more consistently to daily survival than a dramatic hunting weapon, yet it is far less likely to survive. The archaeological record is therefore biased toward the spectacular and the durable. Stone hand axes fill museum cases because stone persists. Wooden containers, poles, frames, handles, digging sticks, wedges, and carrying devices vanish. Fibers used for binding disappear almost completely. A complete Middle Pleistocene toolkit may have contained many objects that leave no recognizable trace. Schöningen in Germany provides the richest surviving collection of worked wood from the period, though its attribution must now be treated carefully. The site contains at least 10 spears, 7 throwing sticks, and many other pieces showing splitting, scraping, repair, and reuse. Earlier accounts commonly dated the main assemblage to around 300,000 years ago and assigned it confidently to Homo heidelbergensis. A revised chronology published in 2025 places the relevant layer closer to 200,000 years ago, making early Neanderthals or a closely related population more plausible makers. The revised date does not reduce the technological importance of the objects. It does, however, warn against using them as simple proof of Heidelberg behavior. Species labels change as dating improves. The craftsmanship remains. The Schöningen woodworkers selected suitable trees, removed branches and bark, straightened shafts, shaped points, and repaired damaged pieces. Some wood was reused rather than discarded. The makers understood where strength lay within a trunk and how grain affected fracture. A spear must be balanced well enough to handle and strong enough to resist breaking. A throwing stick must have the right mass and shape to travel effectively. These are engineered objects, even though no measurements were written down. Woodworking also requires time. Stone can cut fibers, but shaping a longshaft is laborious. Bark must be removed, knots must be managed, surfaces may be scraped repeatedly. A tool damaged in use can be shortened, reshaped, or converted to another purpose. Such maintenance suggests that wooden implements were valued possessions rather than disposable branches picked up moments before use. This value may influence movement. A carefully made hand axe can travel with its owner. A wooden spear can be carried, repaired, and reused. Raw materials gathered in one place may be transported to another. Technology, therefore, becomes part of mobility, allowing people to bring familiar solutions into unfamiliar terrain. Hands are central to every stage. One grips the stone core while the other controls the hammer. Fingers test an edge. Palms rotate a shaft. Shoulders supply force, but fine adjustments determine success. The same body capable of dragging timber also performs delicate corrections along a thin cutting margin. The contrast between power and precision is one of the clearest signs that these people should not be imagined as crude tool users. The tools also reveal foresight. A digging stick is made before the resource is reached. A hand axe may be prepared before a carcass is found. A wooden shaft requires investment before its purpose can be fulfilled. This means people can delay reward, carry unfinished plans, and prepare for future conditions rather than responding only to immediate need. No single tool proves language, social organization, or symbolic thought, yet taken together, the technologies point towards stable traditions. Techniques are repeated across generations. Materials are selected according to shared understanding. Mistakes are corrected. Useful designs persist. What survives in the record suggests communities of practice, not isolated flashes of invention. Stone preserves the edge of this world, while wood preserves its hidden volume. Between them lies a technological system capable of reshaping both objects and places. A trunk becomes a joined structure, a branch becomes a digging implement, a stone becomes a cutting tool that creates another tool. The landscape no longer provides only raw materials. It becomes a field of possibilities, recognized by minds that can imagine forms not yet present, and hands skilled enough to bring them into being. Across an open plain, survival depends on seeing before being seen. Wind carries scent, hooves transmit vibration through the ground. Herd animals raise their heads almost together when something changes at the edge of vision. A human group moving toward them cannot rely on strength alone. Large prey is faster, heavier, and often more dangerous than the hunters. The advantage lies in timing, terrain, tools, and the ability of several people to act with a shared purpose. Middle Pleistocene landscapes provide many opportunities for obtaining meat, fat, hide, bone, sinew, and other valuable materials. But the archaeological evidence does not always reveal whether an animal was hunted, scavenged soon after death, or encountered in some other condition. Cut marks show processing. Broken bones show access to marrow. Stone tools beside a carcass show human activity. Proving the exact manner of death is more difficult. This distinction matters because hunting has often been used as a measure of humanity. Older reconstructions portrayed early people as ineffective scavengers until a later evolutionary breakthrough produced organized hunters. Other accounts swung too far in the opposite direction, imagining every concentration of the animal bone as the aftermath of a dramatic chase. The evidence points toward flexibility. Middle Pleistocene groups likely hunted some animals, scavenged others, and adapted their choices to opportunity, risk, and season. Boxgrove offers one of the clearest views of what happened after a large animal became available. Around 480,000 years ago, on a coastal plain in what is now southern England, humans processed a horse with remarkable thoroughness. They removed hide and meat, opened bones for marrow, shaped stone tools beside the carcass, and used fragments of bone as implements. The distribution of remains suggests that many activity occurred within a concentrated period, possibly over the course of a day. The scene is unusually vivid because the work appears tightly organized. Stone flakes accumulate where cutting edges are produced. Bones carry marks from systematic butchery. Useful portions are removed. Heavy waste remains behind. Several people may have worked around the carcass at once, though archaeology cannot assign each flake or cut to a particular individual. What survives in the record suggests coordinated labor rather than an unstructured struggle over food. The horse itself represents a temporary abundance. A large carcass contains far more than one person can use quickly. But its value declines as predators arrive and decomposition begins. Speed matters. So does order. Skinning is easier before meat is removed from certain areas. Joints must be opened in ways that preserve usable portions. Bones selected for tools require different treatment from bones broken only for marrow. The group must know what to take first and what can wait. A famous mark on a horse shoulder blade from Boxgrove was once interpreted as damage caused by a spear, offering what seemed to be direct evidence of the killing blow. A 2025 reassessment concluded that the fracture fits better with hammerstone impact during carcass processing. This correction is important. One dramatic piece of evidence no longer supports the original story as strongly as it once did. It does not follow that the Boxgrove people were incapable of hunting horses. The broader context, human technology, and access to fresh carcasses remain consistent with active hunting, but the shoulder blade cannot be treated as proof of a spear thrust. Archaeology advances through precisely this kind of revision. When a familiar interpretation is tested against new experiments, imaging, and comparative evidence, the lesson is not that the earlier researchers failed, but that violent events are especially difficult to reconstruct from broken bone. A fracture can be produced during hunting, butchery, trampling, sediment pressure, or later disturbance. The more vivid the claim, the more carefully alternative explanations must be considered. No single mark should carry an entire hunting narrative. Schöningen once appeared to provide a simpler case. The wooden spears found there are carefully shaped, balanced, and unquestionably capable of functioning as hunting weapons. Their association with animal remains and a lakeside environment led to reconstructions of organized horse hunting by Homo heidelbergensis around 300,000 years ago. For decades, the site became one of the strongest examples of large game hunting by pre-modern humans. The wooden collection remains extraordinary, but the chronology has changed. Research published in 2025 places the principal spear-bearing deposits closer to 200,000 years ago. If this revised date is accepted, the makers were more likely early Neanderthals or a closely related population than Homo heidelbergensis in the traditional sense. The weapons still demonstrate planning, woodworking, and hunting capability. What changes is the confidence with which they can be assigned to a species. This uncertainty returns again and again. Behavior survives more clearly than identity. A spear can reveal the skill of its maker even when the maker's name disappears. The Schöningen weapons show knowledge of tree selection, balance, point shaping, and repair, whether thrown, thrust, or used in more than one way. They extend the human body into a dangerous space where approaching too closely could be fatal. Open ground hunting requires more than a weapon. Hunters must understand where animals move, how wind affects scent, and which terrain limits escape. A marshy margin can slow hooves, a shoreline can narrow movement, a slope may conceal approach. A herd entering a confined area becomes easier to predict than one scattered across a broad plain. The landscape itself becomes part of the hunting technology. Humans do not need to overpower an animal through direct force if they can guide it toward disadvantage. Noise, position, and coordinated movement may influence direction. Several hunters approaching from different angles can close options without surrounding the herd completely. The exact tactics remain unknown, but the selection of locations suggests that people understood animal movement at a detailed level. Such knowledge is accumulated slowly. Herds return to water. Horses favor certain feeding grounds. Injured animals behave differently from healthy ones. Seasonal changes alter body condition and migration routes. Tracks reveal speed, group size, and freshness. Dung indicates recent presence. Birds and predators provide additional clues. The successful hunter reads a landscape filled with signals. Cooperation reduces some risks while creating the need for trust. A person moving too early can alert the herd. A person standing in the wrong position may block another's path. A thrown weapon must not endanger a companion. The group must coordinate without written instruction, perhaps through gesture, posture, calls, and shared routines learned through repetition. Language may have helped, but the archaeological record cannot tell us what form it took. It is enough to recognize that complex hunting becomes easier when intentions can be communicated. A plan can be rehearsed through demonstration. Roles can be adjusted when terrain changes. Afterward, information about animal movement can be shared with those who were not present. Even without reconstructing words, the behavior implies social coordination. Hunting also begins long before contact with prey. Tools must be prepared. Wooden shafts require time to shape. Stone edges must be sharp. Carrying a heavy hand axe or spear across long distances has an energetic cost, so the group must decide which tools are worth transporting. A damaged implement may be repaired before the next opportunity. These preparations reveal expectation, not merely reaction. After the animal is secured, the risks continue. Blood and scent attract competitors. Lions, hyenas, and other predators may approach. A group processing a carcass must watch the surrounding landscape while working quickly. Fire may offer some deterrence if available, but it cannot guarantee safety. Numbers, awareness, and wooden weapons provide the strongest defense. The carcass then becomes a temporary workshop. Stone is struck, meat is separated, skin is cut with attention to preserving large sections. Tendons may be removed, bone is broken or shaped. Some materials leave the site, while others remain. The distribution of debris preserves the geometry of work long after every gesture has vanished. Food sharing is likely, though the exact rules cannot be recovered. A large animal creates more meat than one hunter can defend, carry, or consume. Cooperation during acquisition makes distribution socially important. Those who shaped tools, tracked prey, watched for predators, maintained fire, or remained at a nearby camp may all participate in the return. The carcass links the hunting ground to the living place. This relationship challenges the idea that a home must be a fixed structure. A group's inhabited territory includes water sources, tool-stone exposures, fuel-gathering zones, animal routes, processing sites, and shelters. The camp is one center within a wider network. Survival depends on moving successfully between these places and remembering how they connect. Large prey also changes the rhythm of movement. A successful acquisition may allow a group to remain nearby while food is consumed and materials are processed. It may encourage temporary storage, drying, or repeated transport from the kill site to a safer location. Yet preservation methods are difficult to prove this early, and meat abundance does not automatically produce permanent settlement. Predators, weather, and mobility continue to impose limits. What Boxgrove and Schöningen reveal most clearly is not a single dramatic hunt. They reveal competence. The Boxgrove people organize the rapid processing of a large animal. The Schöningen woodworkers create specialized weapons and hunting tools, even though their species attribution is now less secure. Together, the sites show that Middle Pleistocene humans and their close descendants were neither helpless scavengers nor invincible masters of the plain. They survived by combining courage with caution. They learned when to approach, when to wait, and when a carcass was not worth defending. They turned wood into distance, stone into access, and social coordination into a force greater than any one body. The giants of the Pleistocene remained dangerous, but human groups had begun to meet that danger With something animals could not easily anticipate, a plan shared across several minds. A successful hunt may dominate the archaeological record, but most days are not built around a single dramatic event. They are built from repetition. Wood must be gathered before the fire weakens. Stone edges must be replaced. Water must be carried from a source that may lie beyond sight of the camp. Plant foods must be searched for, tested, dug, stripped, cracked, or cleaned. Hides and wooden tools require maintenance. A temporary shelter begins to fail as soon as wind, dampness, and movement act upon it. Survival depends less on rare moments of triumph than on hundreds of small tasks completed in the right order. The living group is therefore the most important technology these humans possess. No individual can watch every direction, locate every resource, carry every tool, process every carcass, maintain fire, repair shelter, and remain alert through the night. Cooperation divides these demands across several bodies and minds. The exact size of Middle Pleistocene groups is unknown, and archaeological sites rarely preserve a complete social unit. A concentration of tools may represent one group, repeated visits by several groups, or debris accumulated over long periods. Yet what survives in the record suggests people lived through sustained relationships rather than isolated existence. Daily cooperation need not resemble formal job assignment. Tasks may shift with age, experience, health, season, and immediate need. One person skilled in stoneworking can produce edges while others gather wood. Several people can process an animal while another monitors the surroundings. Someone familiar with nearby vegetation may know where dry fuel remains after rain. The group's strength lies in flexibility, not rigid specialization. A camp begins to acquire an internal order through these activities. Heavy stones used for breaking bone or shaping tools remain near work areas. Sharp flakes gather where stone is reduced. Animal tissue is processed away from the cleanest resting space when conditions allow. Wood is stacked within reach of the fire but not close enough to ignite. Useful tools are placed where they can be found again. Nothing needs to be marked by walls for the arrangement to be understood by those using it. Such order reduces accidents and wasted effort. A cutting edge left beneath bedding can injure a hand. A hammerstone carried repeatedly across the camp costs energy. Food scraps near a resting place attract insects and scavengers. Smoke drifting into a shelter makes sleep difficult. The rules of space may never be spoken in formal terms, yet experience teaches where things belong. At Boxgrove, the organization visible around the horse carcass gives a brief view of coordinated work. At Terra Amata, repeated occupations and different patterns of raw material use suggest people returned with established ways of arranging tasks. Kalambo Falls shows that timber itself could be positioned to make an area more usable. None of these sites preserves an entire day, but together they hint at social routines repeated so often that they became embedded in the ground. Food sharing would have been central to those routines. Large animals provide more meat and fat than one person can consume quickly. While many plant resources are gathered in smaller quantities over longer periods, a group diet may therefore combine irregular abundance with steady collection. Sharing reduces the danger that one individual's failure becomes fatal. A person who finds little on one day can benefit from another's success, with the expectation that roles may reverse later. The exact rules of distribution remain invisible. Food may have been divided according to effort, need, status, kinship, or immediate circumstance. Different groups may have followed different customs. Archaeology can show that several people had access to a carcass. but not who received the richest portions. Even so, the repeated processing of large animals strongly implies a social system capable of controlling competition long enough for cooperation to remain worthwhile. Plant foods add another layer of shared knowledge. Roots and tubers may require digging sticks, such as the possible wooden tool from Marathousa. Nuts must be gathered at the correct season. Some plants are edible only after processing. Others resemble dangerous species. Knowledge of these resources is difficult to discover by chance and costly to lose. It is likely transmitted through observation, demonstration, and repeated participation. Teaching may occur without a separate lesson. A less experienced toolmaker watches the sequence of strikes. Someone learning to gather fuel notices which fallen branches are rejected and which are carried back. A person preparing a wooden shaft sees how knots are removed and how the grain is followed. Skill passes through shared activity, with errors corrected before they become expensive. This kind of teaching suggests patience. A learner wastes stone, produces weak edges, or takes longer than an expert. Allowing practice carries a short-term cost but protects the group's future ability. No fossil preserves instruction, yet the long continuity of complex technologies is difficult to explain without reliable transmission between generations. Communication would be essential. Gestures, facial expression, calls, rhythm, and spoken sounds could coordinate movement and work. The anatomy and behavior of these populations suggest communication more complex than simple alarm signals, but the evidence cannot reveal vocabulary or grammar. Scholars still debate how language evolved and when recognizably modern speech emerged. It is safer to imagine a flexible system of vocal and visual communication than to place fully modern conversation into a world that cannot confirm it. Even without knowing the words, the situations requiring communication are clear. A dangerous animal is approaching. Fuel is nearly gone. A tool has broken. Water lies in a particular direction. A group preparing to move must know who is ready and what should be carried. A hunting plan fails when participants misunderstand timing. A camp functions more efficiently when intentions can be shared before action begins. Rest is equally important, though it leaves almost no trace. After hours of walking, cutting, lifting, or gathering, bodies need recovery. A protected surface, dry bedding, warmth, and social proximity reduce the cost of sleep. The arrangement of a temporary shelter may be shaped as much by resting needs as by weather. Grass, leaves, hides, or branches could soften the ground, but these materials usually decay. What appears today as bare sediment may once have been carefully prepared. Sleeping also creates vulnerability. Vision narrows, reaction slows, fire must be maintained or allowed to fade. Predators and unfamiliar humans may move nearby. A group sleeping together gains protection through numbers, especially if periods of waking and resting overlap naturally. It is unnecessary to imagine a formal guard schedule to recognize that not everyone must be asleep at the same moment. Firelight may extend the social day. Tools can be inspected. Food can be divided. Wood can be scraped. Bodies recover while communication continues. The hearth becomes a place where knowledge is repeated. Relationships are reinforced, and tensions may be managed. These social effects cannot be excavated directly, but a group that depends on cooperation must possess ways of preserving trust. Conflict surely existed, as it does among all social primates, but daily life could not be sustained through constant aggression. People must tolerate close proximity, share dangerous tasks, and rely on one another during injury or scarcity. The survival of individuals with healed wounds in ancient populations suggests that physical impairment did not always lead to immediate exclusion. Assistance may have included food sharing, slower travel, protection, or simply allowing recovery within the group. Care should not be exaggerated into a modern moral system. A healed injury can result from several circumstances, and not every impaired person necessarily received prolonged support. Yet some conditions would make independent survival extremely difficult. When such individuals lived long enough for substantial healing, social assistance becomes a reasonable inference. Older members may have held particular value because memory is a survival resource. A person who has experienced several climatic cycles can recognize signs of drought, flood, migration, or approaching cold. They may remember alternative water sources and routes used when familiar ones fail. Physical strength can decline while environmental knowledge becomes more valuable. The same is true for knowledge of place. A recurring camp contains invisible history. One patch floods after prolonged rain. One slope remains dry. A certain tree species produces less smoke. A particular stone source lies beyond the ridge. Groups returning to a known location do not begin from nothing. They inherit a mental map shaped by previous visits. Personal identity also exists within these routines. Though it is difficult to recover, individuals differ in skill, temperament, experience, physical ability, and social influence. One person may produce especially refined hand axes. Another may be better at reading tracks or selecting timber. These distinctions do not appear clearly in species descriptions, which reduce thousands of lives to averages of bone and tooth. Occasionally, a tool hints at an individual hand. Repeated striking habits, preferred shapes, and characteristic mistakes can sometimes be recognized in stone assemblages. The evidence is rarely strong enough to identify one person, but it reminds us that technologies were not made by an abstract species. Each object passed through a particular grip, guided by a particular sequence of choices. Daily life is where the idea of home becomes most meaningful. A structure alone is only arranged material. It becomes a living place when people gather fuel, prepare food, repair tools, sleep, teach, remember, and return. The earliest homes may have lasted only briefly, yet the social patterns within them were durable. Walls are not what hold such a group together. Shared attention does. Someone notices the dying fire, someone recognizes a useful branch, someone remembers the safer crossing, someone divides the food, repairs the tool, or adjusts the shelter before rain. The people commonly called Homo heidelbergensis survive not simply because they possess strong bodies and large brains, but because they can make one another part of the solution. The movement from Africa into Eurasia is often drawn as a set of arrows crossing a map, but no migrating population experiences itself as an arrow. People move because water shifts, animals travel, familiar resources fail, or new territory opens beyond a known horizon. They move in stages, following valleys, coastlines, river systems, and gaps between mountains. Some journeys carry groups only a few kilometers beyond the land their elders knew. Over many generations, those small decisions can place human populations in climates, ecosystems, and seasons unlike anything encountered before. The populations commonly associated with Homo heidelbergensis and related Middle Pleistocene humans occupy a world already shaped by earlier dispersals. Homo erectus and other ancient humans had left Africa long before them. Eurasia was not an empty continent waiting to be discovered. Nor was every later movement the beginning of one continuous expansion. Different populations entered, withdrew, became isolated, mixed, or disappeared. The archaeological record suggests repeated pulses rather than one triumphant march northward. Routes between Africa and Eurasia change with climate. The Nile Corridor, the Levant, the Arabian Peninsula, and coastal zones can become more or less passable as rainfall patterns shift. Grasslands spread into regions that later become desert. Lakes appear, shrink, and vanish. Animals expand their ranges along newly productive corridors, and humans can follow those moving ecosystems. When dry conditions return, the same route may close behind them. A population does not need to intend a continental migration. It may simply follow prey into a neighbouring valley, return to a distant water source, or move away from local scarcity. Children born at the new edge of the territory grow up treating it as familiar ground. Their descendants travel farther still. What later looks like a vast expansion may have consisted of many local movements separated by pauses, reversals, and population losses. Northern landscapes demand more than courage. Seasonal variation becomes sharper. Summer may provide long daylight, rich vegetation, and large animal herds. Winter reduces plant foods, freezes water, shortens useful daylight, and increases the energetic cost of every task. A region abundant for part of the year may become nearly uninhabitable when cold arrives. Survival depends on understanding not only where resources exist, but when they exist. This is where memory becomes as important as muscle. A group must know which valley offers protection from prevailing wind, where fuel remains accessible after snow or prolonged rain, and which animals stay through winter rather than migrate. Water that is obvious in summer may freeze or disappear beneath changing river conditions. A familiar crossing may become dangerous during flood or thaw. The landscape is not one place but several seasonal versions of the same place. Clothing and hides would have been essential in many colder regions, although direct evidence is rare. Animal skins decay, and simple hide-working leaves few traces beyond cut marks and tool wear. Middle Pleistocene stone tools could remove skin, scrape tissue, and shape edges suitable for processing hides. Whether these people made tailored clothing remains uncertain, but wraps, capes, bedding, and coverings require far less complex construction, and could dramatically reduce heat loss. A hide is not useful merely because it has been removed from an animal. It must be cleaned, stretched, dried, softened, and maintained. Wet skin becomes heavy. Untreated hide can stiffen or decay. Smoke, fat, repeated scraping, and manual working may improve its flexibility, though the exact techniques used this early are difficult to reconstruct. Like woodworking, hide preparation belongs to a technological world that survives only indirectly. Shelter also changes as people enter colder and windier environments. A simple shade structure useful in warm conditions may provide little protection on an exposed European plain. Windbreaks, coverings, carefully chosen cave entrances, and hearth placement become more important. The goal is not necessarily to create a warm interior by modern standards. Even a modest reduction in wind and moisture can preserve body heat and lower the calories needed to survive the night. Natural topography offers part of the solution. South-facing slopes may receive more sunlight. Forest edges reduce wind. River terraces can remain above floodwater while providing access to animals and fuel. Caves with favorable orientation can trap warmth, though smoke and dampness remain problems. A successful group does not occupy every available shelter. It selects among them according to season. Western Europe may have been occupied repeatedly during warmer intervals and partially abandoned when conditions worsened. The 2026 review of early occupations emphasizes dispersal, demographic instability, and the difficulty of assuming continuous settlement. Populations may have been small, scattered, and vulnerable to local extinction. A few severe winters, reduced prey, disease, or loss of social connections could erase a regional group even if the species survived elsewhere. This vulnerability changes the meaning of adaptation. A population may possess fire, tools, and strong bodies yet still fail to maintain a presence when numbers fall too low. Skills are carried by people. If experienced woodworkers, route finders, or fire managers die without enough learners, knowledge can disappear. Technological ability is not stored outside the group. It survives only through transmission. Small populations also face the problem of isolation. Groups separated by glaciers, deserts, mountains, or long distances may have limited opportunities to exchange mates, tools, and knowledge. Over time, biological and cultural differences can grow. Later researchers may classify the resulting fossils as separate species, even though the boundaries between populations were once gradual and shifting. Europe provides a clear example of this process. Some Middle Pleistocene humans there increasingly display traits associated with Neanderthals. Rather than one widespread Homo heidelbergensis population suddenly transforming at the same moment, regional groups may have developed along different paths. Repeated isolation during cold phases could preserve local traits, while warmer periods allowed movement and renewed contact. Farther east, the history becomes even more difficult to reconstruct. The Denisovan lineage is known primarily through DNA and a small number of physical remains, yet genetic evidence shows that related populations occupied broad parts of Asia and later contributed ancestry to some modern peoples. The common ancestors of Neanderthals and Denisovans may have separated from populations connected to Homo sapiens long before the classic Neanderthal form appeared. Some Eurasian fossils traditionally placed within Homo heidelbergensis may belong closer to this branching history. This does not mean a single Heidelberg population marched east and became Denisovan. The evidence does not support such a simple sequence. It means the Middle Pleistocene contains populations whose relationships are only partly visible. Fossil names describe fragments of that history, while genetics reveals lineages for which the matching bodies remain uncertain. Adaptation to unfamiliar animals would also have taken time. African knowledge could not simply be transferred unchanged into Eurasian ecosystems. New prey species moved differently, responded differently to approach, and followed different seasonal routes. New predators occupied caves and carcasses. Plants that resembled familiar foods might be useless or dangerous. Every successful expansion required observation and experimentation. Tool traditions could remain recognizable while their uses changed. A hand axe made in one region may resemble a hand axe made far away, yet the materials cut with it, the animals processed, and the social routines surrounding it could differ. Broad technological continuity does not imply identical cultures. The same general form can be adapted to local stone, local tasks, and local preferences. Wood presents similar regional constraints. Trees suitable for long straight shafts are not equally available everywhere. Some woods split easily, others resist impact. In treeless or sparsely wooded environments, fuel and construction material become costly. People may carry wooden tools farther, repair them more carefully, or choose camps near limited stands of usable timber. A landscape that seems rich in stone, and animals may still be poor in the materials needed for fire and shelter. The ability to move safely through these regions depends on social networks extending beyond one camp. Neighboring groups may exchange information, raw material, partners, and techniques. Direct evidence for such relationships is limited, but distant stone transport and widespread technological similarities suggest that knowledge did not remain entirely isolated. Contact reduces the risk of local failure by allowing resources and information to circulate. Yet contact can also bring conflict or competition, especially when productive territories shrink. Archaeology rarely reveals the emotional or political dimensions of these encounters. Groups may cooperate, avoid one another, merge, or compete. No single model can describe every meeting across hundreds of thousands of years. The greater pattern is one of persistence without permanence. Humans enter a region, learn its rhythms, establish roots, and create temporary centers. Climate changes. Some remain, some move, and some disappear. Later populations arrive and occupy many of the same river valleys, caves, and lake shores because the underlying advantages endure. In this way, migration and home are not opposites. A mobile people can possess a deep sense of place. Their home may be a network rather than a building, the dry terrace, the winter cave, the summer shoreline, the stone source beyond the ridge, and the sheltered crossing used during migration. Survival depends on knowing when each place becomes useful. The expansion into Eurasia is therefore not a story of leaving home behind. It is a story of learning to make home repeatedly, under different skies, among unfamiliar animals, and through climates that could erase a population as quickly as they opened a path. The people moving north carried no permanent walls with them. They carried something more adaptable, the knowledge that shelter, warmth, tools, and cooperation could be rebuilt wherever the landscape allowed. Bone seems permanent only when compared with flesh. Over hundreds of thousands of years, it cracks, dissolves, is scattered by water, gnawed by animals, crushed beneath sediment, and broken again during excavation. A human skeleton entering the archaeological record is rarely preserved as a complete body lying exactly where life ended. More often, a tooth survives without a jaw, a skull without its face, or a limb bone separated from every other part of the individual. From these fragments, researchers attempt to reconstruct injury, disease, death, and sometimes the actions of other humans. Few areas of early human history demand greater caution. The robust bodies associated with Homo heidelbergensis and related Middle Pleistocene populations carry signs of difficult lives. Joints show wear, teeth are damaged or heavily used, bones preserve fractures that healed and others that did not. Muscle attachments reflect repeated strain, while abnormalities may reveal infection, developmental conditions, or long-term physical stress. Yet every mark must be interpreted within the limits of preservation. A broken bone can record an accident during life, damage around the time of death, pressure after burial, or the movement of sediment centuries later. Healed injuries offer the clearest evidence that an individual survived whatever happened. New bone grows across a fracture, reshaping the damaged area. The extent of healing can indicate that the person lived for weeks, months, or longer afterward. Such survival does not automatically prove deliberate nursing, but serious impairment often makes complete independence unlikely. Food may have been shared, movement may have slowed, Other group members may have reduced immediate risk while recovery took place. This possibility matters because it reveals survival as a social achievement. A damaged arm limits tool making and carrying. A leg injury reduces travel speed. Severe dental problems make some foods difficult to process. An individual who remains alive despite such limitations may be benefiting from the group's ability to distribute tasks and resources. Care need not have been sentimental in a modern sense. It may simply have been part of a practical system in which people who were temporarily less productive still retained knowledge, relationships, and future value. The opposite problem appears when injuries show no healing. A fracture made close to death can retain sharp edges and patterns different from dry bone broken long afterward. Researchers compare these features with experimental damage and known forensic examples. Even then, determining cause remains difficult. A fall, an animal attack, a collapsing rock, a hunting accident, or conflict between humans can produce overlapping forms of trauma. At Cima de los Huesos in northern Spain, a deep cave chamber has yielded the remains of at least several dozen Middle Pleistocene humans, many displaying early Neanderthal features. They lived roughly 430,000 years ago and were once frequently placed within Homo heidelbergensis. Today, many researchers regard them as members of the developing Neanderthal lineage. Their concentration in one chamber is extraordinary, but the reasons so many bodies entered the cave remains debated. One skull from the site carries two similar impacts on the forehead, both produced before the bone dried. The repeated location and shape have been interpreted as evidence that the individual was struck deliberately, making it one of the earliest plausible cases of fatal interpersonal violence. That interpretation is powerful, but it should not be expanded into a general portrait of constant aggression. One person's death cannot define an entire population, and the exact circumstances remain unknowable. The larger collection raises another mystery. The chamber is difficult to access, and the bodies may have been deliberately placed there, perhaps representing an early form of mortuary behavior. An alternative explanation is that natural processes, accidental falls, or water movement concentrated the remains. No single explanation fully accounts for every detail. If deliberate deposition occurred, it would suggest that the dead were treated in a patterned way long before secure evidence for formal burial became common. If natural accumulation is responsible, the cave still preserves a rare biological sample, but not necessarily a ritual act. The uncertainty illustrates how easily modern expectations enter interpretation. A group of bodies in one place resembles a burial site to modern eyes. A damaged skull resembles murder. Cut-marked human bone resembles cannibalism. Each may be correct, but resemblance is not proof. Archaeologists must first eliminate geological, animal, and accidental causes before assigning social meaning. Human bones bearing stone tool marks are among the most controversial remains. Fine cuts can show that tissue was removed with a sharp edge. Percussion damage may indicate that bone was struck while fresh, when the same processing patterns appear on both human and animal remains. Researchers may infer that bodies were treated as sources of meat, marrow, or other materials. This is commonly described as cannibalism, but even direct processing evidence cannot reveal motive. Consumption may occur during extreme scarcity, conflict, ritual practice, or ordinary treatment of enemies or group members within a cultural system unfamiliar today. Some cut-marked bodies may have been cleaned as part of mortuary behavior without significant consumption. Others may have been processed for practical reasons. The evidence can reveal actions more confidently than intentions. Not every famous case belongs to Homo heidelbergensis. Earlier human remains from sites such as Grandolina in Spain show clear processing marks but are generally associated with Homo antecessor, not the later Middle Pleistocene populations at the centre of this story. Combining these sites into one continuous species narrative creates a false impression that cannibalism was a defining Heidelberg behaviour. Human remains separated by hundreds of thousands of years cannot be treated as evidence for one stable custom. Even within the Middle Pleistocene, species attribution remains difficult. A fossil may have been labelled Homo heidelbergensis when first described, then reassigned closer to Neanderthals as new anatomical or genetic evidence emerges. The behaviour attached to the fossil often remains in popular accounts after the classification has changed. This is how uncertainty disappears from public memory. The dramatic action survives, while the scientific qualification is forgotten. Animal damage creates additional confusion. Carnivores can puncture, scrape, crush, and scatter human bones. Hyenas are particularly capable of breaking large bones and transporting body parts. A cave containing human remains may have served as a den rather than a shelter. Tooth marks can sometimes be distinguished from stone cuts, but weathering and surface damage blur the difference. At open-air sites, trampling by large animals can create marks that resemble deliberate modification. Water is equally destructive. A flood separates bones according to size and density, rounds their edges, and carries them into depressions. A complete body may become a scattered collection spread across a wide area. Later researchers encountering one cluster may assume that certain parts were deliberately selected when hydraulic movement was responsible. Sediment analysis is therefore as important as anatomy. Mortality patterns are especially difficult to reconstruct because preservation is selective. Strong teeth survive better than fragile bones. Caves preserve differently from open plains. Individuals whose remains enter protected sediments are more likely to be found than those who die on exposed ground. The known fossils are not a balanced census of the living population. They are the survivors of geological chance. This bias limits attempts to estimate lifespan, social structure, or population health. A collection containing many mature adults may reflect real survival patterns, but it may also result from the way bodies accumulated or were preserved. A small sample cannot reveal how common a disease was across a continent. One unusually robust individual does not define every member of the group. Teeth provide some of the most intimate evidence. Their enamel records periods of stress during growth. Where patterns reflect diet and the use of the mouth as a tool, calculus can trap microscopic traces of food and environment. Broken or infected teeth reveal pain that may have lasted for years, yet the experience of that pain cannot be measured. The person may have adapted by changing food, relying on others to process it, or using the opposite side of the mouth. The physical record therefore presents human life through damage. Healthy soft tissue vanishes. Ordinary comfort leaves little trace. Cooperation is inferred from survival after injury, while conflict is inferred from trauma. This can distort the past toward hardship and violence because bones preserve the moments when bodies failed more clearly than the long intervals when they functioned well. What survives suggests that Middle Pleistocene people faced accidents, illness, predation, and occasional interpersonal violence, as human groups have throughout history. Some bodies may have been processed after death. Some individuals survived serious impairment. Some remains may have been intentionally placed in unusual locations. None of these clues supports a single simple portrait. The broken bones are valuable precisely because they resist certainty. They reveal actions without explanations, outcomes without memories, and injuries without witnesses. Behind every fracture lies an event, but archaeology reaches that event through layers of damage and chance. The task is not to make the fragments speak more dramatically than they can. It is to listen carefully to what they preserve, and to recognize the silence surrounding everything they do not. A species name promises more certainty than the Middle Pleistocene can easily provide. It suggests a population with recognizable boundaries, shared ancestry, and enough anatomical consistency to separate it from neighboring groups. Homo heidelbergensis once seemed to offer exactly that. It could stand between Homo erectus and later humans, explain a long interval of change, and provide a convenient ancestor for both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. The difficulty is that the fossils placed inside this category do not always resemble one another closely enough, nor do they fall into one clear branch of the human family tree. The Mauer jaw anchors the name, but it cannot define a species across Africa and Eurasia. When other fossils were added, they often entered the category because they were roughly the right age and appeared intermediate between earlier and later humans. The result was a broad container, a European specimen with emerging Neanderthal traits, an African skull with a different facial structure, and an Asian fossil preserving older anatomy might all be discussed under the same name because no better framework seemed available. The framework worked best when human evolution was imagined as a sequence. Homo erectus came first, Homo heidelbergensis followed, and then the familiar regional descendants appeared. Europe produced Neanderthals. Africa produced Homo sapiens. Somewhere in Asia, a related population became Denisovan. The model was clear, memorable, and probably too simple. Fossils from Europe increasingly show that Neanderthal anatomy developed gradually. The people from Cima de los Huesos, around 430,000 years ago, already possess several features strongly associated with later Neanderthals. Ancient genetic evidence places them close to the Neanderthal lineage, rather than in a neutral ancestral population equally related to all later humans. For some researchers, they are better understood as early Neanderthals, or a population already moving in that direction. Other European fossils may occupy earlier points along the same path. Their brow ridges, faces, teeth, and skull shapes form a mosaic rather than a sudden package. Neanderthals do not appear fully formed on one date. Their anatomy accumulates over time as populations remain partly isolated, expand during favourable climates, and contract into refugees when conditions worsen. If this gradual process is accepted, Homo heidelbergensis may shrink from a continent-wide ancestor into a narrower label applied only to some fossils. The African record creates a different problem. Fossils such as Kabwe have often been included within Homo heidelbergensis, but many researchers prefer the name Homo rhodesiensis for some African Middle Pleistocene humans. That term has a complicated history and solves little by itself. It can also create the illusion that African fossils form one unified species when they may represent several populations separated across enormous distances and long periods. Some African fossils preserve features later associated with Homo sapiens, while others retain more archaic anatomy. The emergence of modern humans now appears to have involved population structure within Africa, rather than one small birthplace occupied by a single isolated group. Different regions may have contributed different traits and genetic lineages over time. Calling all African Middle Pleistocene fossils Homo heidelbergensis may therefore conceal the very diversity that helped produce Homo sapiens. The 2026 research on early hominins from Morocco deepens this uncertainty. Fossils around 773,000 years old appear basal to the Homo sapiens lineage and help clarify the deeper separation of African and Eurasian populations. Rather than restoring one simple ancestor, It supports a branching history in which populations related to future Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans were already diverging in complex ways. Many fossils traditionally grouped as Homo heidelbergensis may sit on different branches rather than inside one species. Denisovans make the problem even more striking because they are known more clearly from genes than from bodies. A small collection of remains from Denisova Cave has revealed a lineage that contributed ancestry to some present-day populations across Asia and Oceania. Their genetic relationship to Neanderthals is close, but the two lineages were distinct. Their wider range must have extended far beyond the cave that gave them a name. Yet archaeologists still struggle to match many Asian fossils with Denisovan ancestry. Some specimens may belong to Denisovan-related populations, but direct genetic or protein evidence is rare. A skull can appear archaic, regional, or intermediate without a secure lineage assignment. Older classification systems sometimes place such fossils near Homo heidelbergensis because that was the most available category. Genetics has now shown that the biological landscape was more crowded than the name suggested. The split between Neanderthals and Denisovans also complicates the idea that Eurasian Homo heidelbergensis formed one stable species. Their common ancestors may have occupied parts of Eurasia before the later lineages became distinct, but those ancestors need not correspond neatly to the Mauer jaw or every European fossil of similar age. A population can be ancestral without belonging to the species name once assigned to it, especially when that name was created before genetics transformed the field. Interbreeding makes the boundaries even less tidy. Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Homo sapiens exchange genes after long periods of separation. Denisovans themselves may have included several deeply separated populations. Evolution in this world resembles a network of splitting and reconnecting groups, rather than a ladder of isolated species. Species names remain useful, but the biological reality may have included partial reproductive barriers, regional continuity, and occasional contact. The archaeological sites intensify this difficulty because behavior rarely comes with a fossil attached. Kalambo Falls preserves construction without a known builder. Terra Amata preserves organized occupation without a secure species identification. Marathousa preserves wooden tools without a diagnostic skeleton. Schöningen preserves extraordinary woodworking, but its revised date shifts the most likely makers toward Neanderthals. Boxgrove offers a stronger association with human remains, yet those remains may sit close to the Neanderthal branch, rather than inside a universal Heidelberg species. As a result, the phrase Homo heidelbergensis built shelters can be both useful and misleading. It may summarize the behavior of humans living in the broad period traditionally associated with that name, but it can also imply that one clearly defined species invented architecture and spread the behavior across continents. The evidence supports neither claim with confidence. A safer description speaks of Middle Pleistocene humans, including populations traditionally called Homo heidelbergensis, and groups near the ancestry of Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Homo sapiens. The wording is less elegant but more honest, shifting attention from the desire to name one inventor toward the deeper pattern. Several related human populations were becoming increasingly capable of organizing living space, managing fire, shaping wood, coordinating work, and surviving unstable environments. Scholars still debate whether Homo heidelbergensis should be retained broadly, restricted narrowly, divided into regional species, or abandoned as a catch-all. New fossils, better dating, ancient proteins, and additional genetic evidence may change the boundaries again. The name that once seemed to unify an age may eventually describe only a small part of it. The people themselves were not uncertain. They belonged to families, groups, and territories that were real to them. Even if those identities have vanished, they did not know whether they stood near the Neanderthal branch, the Denisovan branch, the Sapiens branch, or a lineage that would leave no descendants. They knew the places where wood could be found, where animals crossed, where fire survived the night, and where shelter could be made. Modern classification looks backward and tries to draw borders across a moving population history. The fossils resist because evolution had not arranged itself for the convenience of later science. What appears from a distance as one species may, on closer inspection, be several lineages sharing some traits, exchanging others, and adapting in parallel. Homo heidelbergensis may therefore be less a single ancestor than a signpost placed in the middle of a branching road, useful for orientation, but never the road itself. No final layer of earth marks the disappearance of Homo heidelbergensis. There is no single horizon above which the fossils suddenly stop, no catastrophe that removes one people and leaves an empty continent behind. The name fades because the populations placed beneath it change, divide, move, and become increasingly difficult to distinguish from the lineages that follow. What looks like extinction from the distance of 500,000 years may have been transformation experienced one generation at a time. A species can disappear in several ways. Its last members may die without descendants. It may be absorbed through interbreeding with another population. It may divide into daughter lineages until the ancestral form no longer exists as a separate group. It may also vanish mainly on paper when researchers decide that the fossils assigned to it never belong to one coherent species. Homo heidelbergensis may involve elements of all these possibilities, depending on which fossils the name is intended to include. The older evolutionary story imagined a widespread species occupying Africa and Europe, perhaps reaching into parts of Asia, before dividing into three great branches. European populations became Neanderthals. Asian relatives contributed to Denisovans. African populations developed into Homo sapiens. In that model, Homo heidelbergensis did not suffer a simple extinction. It became later humanity. The broad outline still contains something useful. Middle Pleistocene populations did contribute to the lineages that produced Neanderthals, Denisovans, and modern humans. Yet the process was probably more complex than one parent species splitting cleanly into three descendants. The populations involved were already structured, regionally diverse, and repeatedly separated by climate and geography. Some branches may have diverged earlier than the fossil record once suggested. Others may have reconnected after long isolation. Europe provides the clearest example of gradual change. Fossils from several sites show Neanderthal traits accumulating over time rather than appearing suddenly. Teeth, faces, skull bases, and parts of the brain case become increasingly recognizable as belonging to the Neanderthal lineage. The Cima de los Huesos population, around 430,000 years ago, already displays a strong Neanderthal signal. These people are not simply neutral Heidelberg humans waiting to choose an evolutionary direction. They appear to belong to a branch already taking shape. Climate repeatedly tightens and loosens the boundaries around that branch. During colder periods, northern regions become difficult or impossible to occupy. Human groups contract into more favourable refuges, perhaps in southern Europe or other protected zones. Population numbers fall, and contact between regions decreases. Isolation allows local anatomy and traditions to develop along distinctive paths. When warmer conditions return, populations expand again, valleys reopen, herds move northward, forests and grasslands shift. Human groups follow, carrying their genes, tools, and local knowledge into territories abandoned during the cold. These cycles of contraction and expansion do not simply repeat the same population pattern. Each one begins with survivors who may represent only part of the earlier diversity. This demographic filtering can accelerate change. A regional population reduced to a small number carries only a fraction of the genetic variation that existed before. Traits can become common through selection, chance, or both. Later expansion spreads those traits across wider territory, repeated over hundreds of thousands of years. Such cycles may help explain why European fossils become increasingly Neanderthal-like. The process would have been invisible to the people living through it. No child was born as the first Neanderthal after parents who were Homo heidelbergensis. Families resembled nearby families. Each generation differed only slightly from the one before. Species boundaries drawn by modern science compress gradual change into named categories that the living populations never crossed in one moment. Africa followed a different pattern. Its size, ecological diversity, and shifting climatic corridors allowed populations to become separated without remaining permanently isolated. Wet phases opened connections across regions that were later divided by desert. River systems expanded and contracted. Grasslands linked distant habitats, then fragmented into smaller zones. Human populations could diverge locally and later meet again. The emergence of Homo sapiens may therefore have drawn from several connected African populations rather than one isolated ancestral group replacing all others. Some fossils once called African Homo heidelbergensis may belong near this evolving network. Others may represent branches that contributed little or nothing to later humans. Their disappearance may involve absorption, local extinction, or taxonomic reassignment rather than one continental event. The 2026 Moroccan fossils add an earlier layer to this history. At roughly 773,000 years old, they appear close to the base of the lineage leading toward Homo sapiens. Their existence suggests that some important population divisions were already developing long before the classic fossils usually described as Heidelberg. The category may therefore cover not one ancestral species, but several populations living after deep branches had begun to separate. Asia remains the least visible part of the transformation. Denisovan DNA reveals that one or more related populations occupied vast regions, adapted to very different environments, and later contributed ancestry to present-day people. Yet only a small number of physical remains can be connected securely to them. Many Asian Middle Pleistocene fossils remain difficult to classify, and some may belong to Denisovan-related groups whose appearance is still largely unknown. The disappearance of Homo heidelbergensis in Asia may therefore be partly an illusion created by missing names. Populations once placed vaguely near Heidelberg may eventually be connected to Denisovans. Early Neanderthal relatives, regional archaic humans, or lineages not yet identified. The fossil record is too sparse to trace a continuous sequence, but genetics makes one fact clear: the continent held more human diversity than bones alone once revealed. Interbreeding further complicates every boundary. Neanderthals and Denisovans exchanged genes. Homo sapiens later mixed with both. Denisovan-related groups may themselves have been deeply divided. Ancestral populations could separate for tens of thousands of years and still exchange genes when climates or migrations brought them together again. In such a world, disappearance does not always mean replacement. A population can cease to exist as a recognizable group while parts of it survive inside others. The same may have happened culturally. Tool traditions, woodworking techniques, knowledge of fire, and methods of organizing camps can outlast the biological population that first carried them. A new group entering a region may encounter no surviving inhabitants, yet similar environmental problems can produce similar solutions. In other cases, direct contact may allow techniques to pass between populations. Archaeology often preserves continuity of behavior more clearly than continuity of people. This is why hand axes persist across enormous spans of time even as the makers change. The form remains useful. It can be learned, adapted, and recreated. Wooden technologies almost certainly followed similar patterns, though preservation rarely allows them to be traced. A shelter design suited to wind or rain may survive through teaching, independent reinvention, or both. The eventual dominance of Neanderthals in much of Europe does not require a sudden conquest of Homo heidelbergensis. Neanderthals may represent the later form of populations already present, shaped by repeated isolation and adaptation, in Africa. Homo sapiens likewise emerge through a long process rather than appearing fully modern in one place and one generation. The ancestral labels fade as derived traits accumulate. Some local populations undoubtedly ended more abruptly. Small groups could disappear after climatic deterioration, loss of prey, disease, or isolation. Western Europe may have experienced repeated regional abandonments followed by recolonization. A camp tradition can vanish when the people who remember it are gone. A route can remain unused for millennia. Local extinction was likely common even if broader lineages endured. No single explanation fully accounts for the end of every population called Homo heidelbergensis. Some became part of the Neanderthal story. Some may lie close to Denisovan ancestry. Some African groups contributed to the deeper formation of Homo sapiens. Others probably left no known descendants. Still others may never have belonged inside the category at all. The disappearance is therefore less like the extinguishing of a flame than the breaking of light through several openings. One beam becomes many. From a distance, the original source seems gone, but its energy continues along different paths. The people themselves vanish from direct memory, yet the strategies that sustained them remain recognizable, choosing favorable ground, managing fire, shaping wood, sharing food, and making temporary order within unstable landscapes. By the time later humans emerge in forms more familiar to science, the old Heidelberg label has lost its clarity. Neanderthals occupy much of Western Eurasia. Denisovan-related populations range across parts of Asia. Homo sapiens develops within Africa and eventually expands beyond it. The world is still divided among human lineages, but none has arisen from nothing. Behind them stand the Middle Pleistocene populations whose names continue to shift. Their disappearance was not necessarily failure. It was the ordinary and extraordinary process of evolution, in which survival can erase the form that survived by transforming it into something new. The legacy of these Middle Pleistocene humans does not rest on one invention, one species name, or one structure that can be pointed to as the first true house. It rests on a widening pattern of behavior, selecting places with care, organizing activity around fire, shaping wood for more than weapons, returning to useful landscapes, and turning temporary occupation into something planned. These practices do not belong exclusively to Homo heidelbergensis. They appear across populations whose identities overlap with early Neanderthals, Denisovan relatives, African ancestors of Homo sapiens, and perhaps other groups still poorly understood. The name remains uncertain, but the transformation it describes is real. The Mauer jaw gave science a label. Kalambo Falls revealed that large timbers could be cut and joined nearly 500,000 years ago. Terra Amata preserved the possibility that temporary shelters were built along the Mediterranean shore. Boxgrove showed a group organising tools and labour around a horse carcass. Marathousa preserved wooden implements suited to ordinary work rather than dramatic hunting. Schöningen revealed a sophisticated woodworking tradition, even after revised dating shifted its likely makers closer to Neanderthals. None of these sites alone tells the whole story. Together they show that human survival had become increasingly architectural, even when no building survived. Architecture begins here not as monument, property, or permanence, but as anticipation. A person cuts a notch because 2 pieces of wood must fit later. A group gathers fuel before darkness, because the fire will otherwise fail. A camp is placed above floodwater because rain may come. A shelter opening is adjusted because smoke follows the wind. These are small predictions, but they change the relationship between humans and the environment. The landscape is no longer accepted only as it is found. It is evaluated according to what it can become. That capacity travels forward into later human lineages. Neanderthals repeatedly occupied caves and open-air sites, maintained hearths, processed animals, shaped wood, and organised living surfaces. Denisovan-related populations survived across enormous parts of Asia, including harsh environments that demanded regional knowledge and long-term adaptation. Homo sapiens eventually carried increasingly elaborate shelters, fuel strategies, clothing systems, storage methods, and social networks into deserts, highlands, forests, coasts, and frozen northern regions. The later evidence becomes richer, but the underlying logic is already visible much earlier. The genetic legacy is equally complex. Some Eurasian Middle Pleistocene populations stood near the ancestry of Neanderthals and Denisovans. Some African populations lay closer to the long, structured emergence of Homo sapiens. These lineages later met and exchanged genes, ensuring that disappearance did not always mean erasure. Parts of archaic human ancestry survive in many people today, though no modern population is simply a living version of Homo heidelbergensis, Neanderthal, or Denisovan. Genetic inheritance is fragmented, recombined, and carried within thoroughly modern human histories. The cultural legacy cannot be traced as directly, but it may be even broader. A stone tool tradition can continue after populations shift. A method of selecting timber may be taught, forgotten, or rediscovered. A favourable campsite can attract many unrelated groups separated by thousands of years because water, fuel, and shelter remain in the same relationship. Similar solutions may therefore result from shared tradition, convergent invention, or both. Archaeology often cannot tell which path produced a particular pattern. What can be seen is a growing dependence on accumulated knowledge. Strength still matters, but knowledge increasingly determines how strength is used. The strongest person cannot keep a fire alive without understanding fuel. The sharpest hand axe is useless if stone cannot be found, or the edge cannot be maintained. A shelter fails if its maker ignores drainage and wind. A migration route becomes deadly if seasonal changes are misunderstood. Survival belongs to groups able to preserve information across time. This preservation may be the deepest legacy of all. A home is partly a structure, but it is also a memory of how to make one. The knowledge that a certain valley floods, that a particular wood burns slowly, that a roof must open above the hearth, or that a raised surface can defeat wet ground is carried in people before it is carried in architecture. Once those lessons can be taught and repeated, every new camp begins with more than the materials present at the site. It begins with experience inherited from elsewhere. That inheritance does not require a permanent village. Mobile groups can possess traditions as durable as walls. They carry methods rather than buildings, plans rather than fixed foundations. When they arrive in a new place, they rebuild familiar order from local materials. A branch becomes a support, a hide becomes a barrier. Stones become tools, weights, or hearth edges. The camp may vanish after departure, but the pattern can be created again. This flexibility helps explain why humans survived climatic instability that repeatedly emptied regions and rearranged ecosystems. They were not protected by one perfect body or one universal technology. They survived through combinations. Fire worked with shelter. Tools worked with hands. Memory worked with movement. Cooperation worked with individual skill. When one resource failed, another strategy could sometimes compensate. The record also shows the limits of that adaptability. Populations still vanished. Regions were abandoned. Knowledge was lost. Small groups could not always withstand severe climate, isolation, or dwindling prey. Human resilience was never absolute. The same archaeological silence that hides shelters may also mark communities whose solutions finally stopped working. For that reason, the story should not end with a claim that Homo heidelbergensis conquered the Ice Age world or invented the home. The evidence supports something quieter and more important. Middle Pleistocene humans learned to create temporary stability inside unstable environments. They could make a wet place drier, a dark place brighter, a cold place warmer, and a dangerous place more defensible. They did not remove uncertainty, but they reduced it enough for life to continue. The old species name may eventually narrow, divide, or disappear from scientific use. New fossils may redraw the branches. Better dating may shift famous sites into different human lineages. Ancient proteins and DNA may give bodies to populations currently known only through fragments. The Mauer jaw may become the representative of a much smaller group than once imagined. None of this would erase the human achievements of the age. It would only distribute them more accurately among the people who made them. Those people stand near the beginning of a long architectural impulse. Later humans build huts, tents, windbreaks, storage pits, houses, villages, walls, and cities. Materials change, scale increases, and permanence becomes possible. Yet every building still answers the same ancient pressures: rain, heat, cold, darkness, danger, privacy, rest, work, and the need to gather with others. Beneath monumental architecture lies the practical intelligence of a body seeking protection. The first home cannot be dated to one day. It probably appeared in many forms, in many places, and perhaps was invented more than once. A natural shelter was improved with branches. A fire was protected by stones. A platform was raised above mud. Posts were set into the ground. Hides were stretched against wind. Most of these experiments vanished without trace. The surviving evidence is exceptional, precisely because the ordinary structures were so fragile. What remains is enough to change the image of these humans. They were not simply heavy-browed figures crossing a hostile landscape with hand axes. They were planners of space, managers of fuel, workers of wood, readers of weather, and members of groups whose survival depended on shared attention. Their homes may have been temporary, But the idea behind them was not. Long after their names blurred into later lineages, that idea continued. A place can be chosen, altered, remembered, and made safer through collective effort. It survives whenever humans gather around warmth, raise themselves above wet ground, repair a roof before a storm, or arrange a room according to the needs of those inside. The scale is different, but the instinct is ancient. Now the landscape begins to quiet. The tools have been carried away, and only a few flakes remain where the stone was struck. The fire settles into ash. Smoke thins above the ground and drifts toward the trees. A wooden frame bends slightly in the night air, its fibers holding against the wind for one more darkness. Beyond the edge of a light, the river continues moving through a channel it will one day abandon. No one within the shelter knows that the species name assigned to them will be debated hundreds of thousands of years later. They do not know that their bones may become fragments in museums, or that a fitted piece of timber may survive long enough to change modern ideas about the beginning of construction. Their world is immediate. The fire must last. The ground must remain dry. The group must rest before moving again. Morning comes without ceremony and the sky pales. Damp wood gives off a final thread of smoke. Bodies rise, tools are gathered, and the useful pieces are selected from what can be carried. Perhaps the shelter is repaired for another night. Perhaps it is left behind. Wind enters the space where people slept, and the boundaries of the camp begin to dissolve. Seasons pass. Sediment covers the hearth. Water preserves one piece of wood and destroys 1,000 others. Forest replaces grassland, then retreats. Animals disappear from the region. New human groups arrive, perhaps related, perhaps not, and they choose many of the same places for the same quiet reasons. Water is near, fuel is available, the ground is protected, the horizon can be watched. Time removes the voices first, then the faces, then almost every object touched by their hands. What remains is uneven a jaw, a broken skull, a cut-marked bone, a scatter of flakes, a dark stain where fire once burned. These traces seem small beside the length of time separating them from the present, but they hold the outline of a familiar desire. To survive is not only to endure the world, it is to make, for a little while, a place within it, a circle of warmth, a surface above the mud, a barrier against wind, other people close enough to hear in the darkness. The ancient shelter finally disappears, but the gesture remains. Across the immense distance between their lives and ours, that gesture is still recognizable, the careful making of a temporary center, while the larger world changes beyond its edges,